Greetings, Battle Brothers. It's me, Aurelia Tempris, defender of the Golden Throne and servant of humanity. Pat, 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 pat. Hi, I hope that wasn't too loud. I realized I was patting on that and I was like, oh, that could have been loud. Hi, welcome in, welcome in. Oh gosh, no. My nails, they don't look very good. No. Do you know why they look cool? It's cause I got them like normally done, and they chip really easily cause I'm super rough with my hands. Oh, the thing is in the way. They're so chipped. I got these done like last week and they're already like gone. So yeah. And I didn't have any nail polish remover. Can't even tell. Yeah, liar. You're lying. You're lying. You can 100% tell. Don't look at them. I didn't have nail polish remover. I should have bought some at the store. Didn't know. Sorry, I'm moving a chat window over so I can see it better. Make sure I can see YouTube. There we go. Strong hands? What? Are you saying that because like I'm rough with them, or like I need to strong hands? I got those man hands, like they need lotion. They're a little dry. You see my veins? Very veiny. I'm so buff and muscular. And this is where I scratched myself with my nail. I actually cut this. I did this on accident. I was moving and I did that. That hurt. Let me grab some lotion. Where did I put it? Oh, it's right here. This is lotion a friend got me. Well, no, actually, it was part of like a goodie basket that my friend made. Lotion ASMR. Never. 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 You guys are... No. No. One sec. There, I slid myself over so you guys can see my face. No. No lotion ASMR. Yo, weirdos. There, here's the lotion. It puts the lotion on its skin. There you go, feels better. No, stop. Stop talking about the technique in which I put on lotion. Oh my gosh. This just... Yeah, it's Twitch chat is just going off today. Hello. We're normal here. At least we try to be. I can't speak for my mods. Today, I will give you, Gamer Sups ASMR. There. You got it. And this is my Gamer Sups cup. I'm having, anime girl thigh today. It's wonderful. So that's what today is. No thumb placement. Well, this one is a lot nicer. This one, like, there's a lot less that you see, so I don't have to, like, cover it up as much. I don't have to cover that. Like, Twitch isn't gonna bonk me for that versus the other one. Maybe. Why is the book sideways? Oh, it's not a book, it's a box, and it's facing me, technically. This is what we have been working on the last time we did this. It is a book nook. Ta-da! And it's got all these fun little pieces. I built books off screen. So we're gonna keep going on this. The instructions are at the bottom, so I have to go get those. One moment. Here it is. Okay. So initially I had planned to print out some pictures to put in this book nook, but I forgot about it, so unfortunately we don't have that today. Oh, book nook. I honestly had no idea what you were making in the last stream. Yeah, it's a book nook. Looks like this. I picked the most gothic looking one so it can be kind of like Warhammer looking. I attempted it at least. Oh, Dino fan, thank you so much for gifting a sub to Ryan. Will there be a karaoke stream? What? What? Since when did this get switched to karaoke? Maybe. Maybe. We did have a small one. I sang one song. You will not make me sing Skippity Toilet. There's no way. No. I would die first. Yeah, we've had more than one song, but not a dedicated singing stream. And I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly okay with that. So, we are gonna start building the base today. But while we do that, we are listening to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. I highly recommend, if you would like to see the pictures in their full glory and detail, pull up the video on your side. Because in order for this to be nice and fun and soothing, the screen has to be small. I made it a little bigger. It's like a tiny bit bigger. But it's more of like, it's a listening thing, and we work while we listen with it in the background. So, yeah. So, in advance, the video is going to be small. So if you want to see all the pictures, you're going to want to pull up the other video so you can see the pictures better. Because I'm doing more listening than I am looking at pictures. Yes, we finished episode 28 last time. We are going to start on episode 29. So I have to paint this. I don't know what items I will need just yet. So we are going to just set these off to the side because I gotta paint this bad boy. Okay. Stupid idea, put a green screen on your desk and project the video that way. Well, we still run into the same problem. I don't have the space to do my hands and the video. And this is easier because I can still do things here. Whereas if it was projected here, it wouldn't work. But you did say it was a stupid idea. The green screen would be your desk? No. You're right. That is a stupid idea. You're correct. You're right. Shouldn't even argue with it at that point. Okay. Let's pull up the video. Alright, we're gonna, I might move my phone. See me better. Okay. We're gonna check the audio to make sure it's okay before we continue. I gotta do some cropping. There. Okay. If I remember, it's kind of loud at sometimes. Yeah, just treat it like we're being read a story. I agree. Yes, that's the best way to do it. That is the best way to do it, if in this arrangement. Okay. Oh. Okay. We're gonna start it. Let me know how the volume is. Oh, sorry. That was loud. Oh, that scared me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
Love the Emperor, for he is the salvation of mankind.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it down a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then I'm gonna have to turn it up.
His words, for he will lead you to the light of the future. Honor his servants.
Okay, I'm turning it down.
His voice. Before his majesty. Walk in his immortal shadow.
I won't wait till he starts talking, and then I'm actually going to adjust the volume.
Stars dance in the eyes of the Emperor and roll in the palms of dark gods.
How was that? Was that good? Was he quiet? Was he loud? Sorry that it was so... Oh, wait. Oh, did I start on the wrong episode? I clicked the right one, I thought. Well, 1 second. 1 moment. I clicked on the wrong one. This one. Okay. There we go. Sorry. Michael Wilson is involved today. Yay! I don't know Michael, but he seems like a chill dude. We are on episode 29, actually. It's a guy that apparently worked on this project with him. I don't know who he is.
Desperation had blanketed the battlefield, every bit as thick and noxious as the columns of black smoke which strafed across the shattered avenue.
Good, good. Now that we are on the correct episode and the volume, is the volume good now? Good, good, good. Good. Make sure everything else is good for everyone. Is the sound good? I'm seeing a lot of yeses. If it's quiet for you, turn up your headphones. Okay, it looks like most people are saying it's good. If it's quiet, crank them headphones up. Okay, let us begin. A weird voice keeps coming through the mic. Are you talking about my voice? Yeah, there it is. Yep, you're talking about me. Okay, fine. I will be quiet. I'll be quiet.
Deadly sisters of the Imperial faith butchered and burned their way up the clone lines. And the clones responded with roars of defiance and lots of missiles and mortars. But the results were far from deadlocked. Both sides had only ever known war.
Oh, that's
Both
right.
sides had become utterly
They're one-upping
dedicated
each other.
weapons of their state. But the clones were barely teenagers, and
Yep.
the sisters were not. Some
They're
as young
women.
as 20 standard years, some as old as 150, and most varied densely between them. The daughters of the Emperor did not lack for time held within the forges of unceasing war, and most were cruelly tempered by it already. One side bore a distinct weapons and experience advantage, which was proving difficult to overcome, as Sando was sadly learning. He and a line of hastily assembled troopers were desperately trying to hold back the advancing Sisters of Battle, their blasters hot in their hands, even as they sought to discard them for heavier weapons. In this, Sando had been fortunate. His long-barreled blaster rifle slung over his shoulder, enabling him to securely hold the DC-17 grenade launcher configuration he had been loaned by Sev, before he and the sniper had been separated. Sando and the other clones stood in a dense mob, crowding over each other on a slope of slag and stretched broken steel. Behind them were the remaining ATTEs of the Vanguard, blasting and firing away as best they could with their heavier weapons. Before them, the screaming advance of the Sisters of Battle. Their forces holding sword and mace aloft, some carrying flamethrowers, and others bearing what Sando could only describe
the clone
as
troopers
super
are cooked,
flamethrowers.
100%.
It was these that he and the others targeted first. Some of the ATTEs had the good sense to prioritize those targets as well, and the worst of the fire-flinging units were successfully pinned down or blown away before they could come into effective weapons range. The others, however, were not so easily stalled. Grunting, screaming, and singing in voices meant for murder, the mob of armored, ornate butchers came forward with blazing and sparking weapons of archaic war clutched in their hands. Swords of lightning flashed, turning the dwindling rain into hissing mist. Maces, crowned in coronas of fire, thrummed in the air as their wielders and their sisters stomped upon and shattered the dead and dying in their path. Sando put his exceptional training and instincts to the test, pulling the trigger on his launcher and firing 400 credits worth of explosive death straight into the armored face of a sword-wielding warrior, blowing most of it away. The woman fell, feet still kicking as she tried to continue her charge, and was trampled by the sister behind her, who crawled over the fallen like a vicious beast, her eye lenses red like blood fury, her voice a thundering hymn of hatred. Sando's hands moved quickly, sliding the next to last grenade in his arsenal into the weapons chamber, but the sister coming for him moved even faster. He ducked her horizontal swing, ignoring the two clones to either side of him, both of whom seemed to burst and blow apart like party poppers as they were struck by the arc of her weapon's attack. Instead of dying or noticing their deaths, Sando bit and pierced his own lip, hardly holding himself back from the suicide of shooting her with his grenade launcher at point-blank range. Rising in a rush of strength born from the fear of sudden death, the clone warrior elbowed the woman's helmet as hard as he could, his white shell cracking as it jarred her ceramite chin. She staggered back slightly, recovering swiftly as Sando slid the handle of his DC-15 into his waiting grip, using his shoulder strap to steady the long barrel. His muscles knotted and burned as he hefted the weapon with one arm and jammed its nozzle into the crease between her shoulder and breastplate.
Oh, well, yeah, she's
He had
toast.
milliseconds to act, and, luckily, the blaster had already been set to maximum output. And as he pulled the trigger, a bright blue flash filled the shoulder of her armor, and the warrior released an agonized scream as she began to convulse at the end of his rifle. Her voice was terrible to hear, but far worse were the death cries of his brothers, and Sando spared her no pity as she tried to pull back off his barrel. The clone keeping the pressure on and firing again and again. The armored sister lost control of her weapon arm, the limb spasming before going limp and releasing her fiery mace, letting the active weapon fall to the broken steel beneath them, burning and pulsing with deadly technology as it rolled down toward the base of the slope they stood on. She made to reach for Sando with her one good arm.
She's
her
still
hand
fighting, it's
into a
incredible.
vicious claw meant to grab and break the white armored body of the clone. But he stepped inside of her grip, shrugging her hand off as he slid one of his feet behind hers and shoved the woman's flailing bulk backward. The sister fell hard and slid partway down the slope on her back, clawing at the broken ground with her good arm before Sando silenced and stilled her with a blast from his grenade launcher. But even with that, the work was far from done.
Yeah, go kill 50
He
more
had
of those.
hoped that their defense would shove the sisters back to their own lines, but as it was, they had barely forced them down the slope. And already the bloody Imperials were rebounding.
Yeah.
Sando let his blaster rifle hang from its
don't know when
strap,
to quit.
reloading his launcher before tapping his helmet and activating his comm channel. He hoped that now that the rain had died down to a drizzle, and the main column of the Republic forces would be closer than before, someone, somewhere, would hear him and help them before it was too late. Vanguard front line needs reinforcements! We are being overrun! Repeat, we are being... He began to report before cutting himself short to grab his grenade launcher with both hands. They were upon them again!
Yep.
He fired between two running Imperials, knocking them both aside and hoping he had done more than stagger them. His next act was to throw his launcher into the face of another, blinding the growling warrior woman enough to duck the horizontal slash of her sparking sword. As he handled his DC-15 once more and jammed it into the joint of her sword arm, now swung wide. He fired, once more disabling the targeted limb, though the sister did not release her weapon as the arm went limp. Her servos jostling and seizing as she screamed fury into his face. He tried to fire again, but the armored joint he had targeted locked up and broke the barrel of his entrapped weapon. Releasing his now useless blaster rifle, Sando spun around and took her weapon arm by the wrist just as she grabbed the back of his armor with her free hand. He twisted free her burning weapon with a hard, wrenching motion, catching it out of the air before it finished falling. Ignoring the scorching heat he felt in his hands as he was yanked back, Sando thrust behind himself with his now stolen sword and impaled the woman through the chest with it. The Imperial fanatic breathed blood into her helmet, her free hand still locked onto the armor on his back, ripping free the white shell and mechanisms there as she collapsed and fell off the end of the sword. The clone could feel no pain and knew she had crushed the magnetic weapons locks on his armor and hopefully little else. But Sando had barely a second to judge the potential damage. Another came for him, almost trampling the first, but Sando drove back the new mace-wielding assailant with wild swings of the dangerous
They have
weapon.
numbers.
This warrior seemed far more wary of the clone than the previous ones had been, and approached him with the steady cadence of a predator. Sando was one of only a handful of men left, and even the tanks behind them had been largely incapacitated by the exchange, having become the targets of the thundering Imperial weapons known as bolters. Still swinging the sword in a desperate warding gesture, Sando's eyes swiveled around in his skull, his brain cooking in desperate, furious calculation. The sisters drove in and, once more, he narrowly avoided death as he whipped out his blaster pistol and shot the ground beneath their feet, causing the rubble to melt and slide under the Imperial's boot, and buying him seconds more. He looked at the surviving clones around him and gestured to them with his blaster pistol. "Fall back! Fall back! Fall back!" He yelled to them. In response to his orders, another sound answered, the warbling roar of LAAT engines. The gunships flew overhead, strafing missiles into the body of the enemy assault while more precise blaster cannon bolts hammered the line where the Imperial forces met the dying borders of the Republic's defense. The results were rapid and violent, creating space between the warring lines in the blink of an eye. But it was only the beginning. Already, Sando could feel the thump, thump, thump of advancing ATTEs, and soon, modified ISP speeders came into view, towing sleds full of fresh troopers ready to dismount in moments. The main column had finally arrived, and the primary engagement of this battlefield had at long last commenced. But the Imperials were less than willing to allow the Republic a moment to rally, and Sando found himself stumbling back as columns of fire and smoke arched up from the savage horde of the Imperium. At first, he thought them to be some kind of weapon, rockets or mortars that the enemy had lobbed towards them. Soon he saw that it was far worse, for these were no mere munitions, but sword and flame-bearing warriors, sisters of the screaming faith of the Empire, descending like angels of death born on hellish black and red wings. They slammed down into the Republic line, crushing clones beneath their feet and wasting no time at all before they resumed their slaughter. One came for Sando, and he scrambled back, not in any position to defend himself adequately. The clone hefted
Sando
his
is not
stolen
gonna
sword
make
and
it.
aimed it up towards the woman. But the gesture did not even slow her as she came for him, face bare and held in a rictus of frenzy as she did. He was moments from using his final breath to order another retreat, but the order was belayed before he could voice it. A flash of movement, unnatural and smooth as the blue clouds of Sumban 9. Sando shielded his eyes from the following sparks, sky-shaded and bright and utterly blinding. Despite this, his heart swelled in sudden faith. Faith in his own survival, faith in victory, for the storm had finally parted, and his general had come. "Hold your positions!" Ayla ordered as she intercepted the winged warrior woman. The Twi'lek Jedi danced and spun, gravity's pull on her body little more than an annoyance to the lithe master. The Imperial, suddenly confronted by such a foe, began skating and scraping out a dance of her own, jets belching and sputtering on her back as she used them to aid her mobility. They exchanged vicious blows, only stopping when the Jedi issued forth a pillar of invisible force into the sister, driving her back several feet. It was clear that the crazed cultist intended to dive right back into the fray, but she was brought up short, Ayla standing tall in brazen challenge as
It's okay
all
if she's
around the
French,
Jedi
guys, it's
Master,
fine.
stacked in ranks upon the slope, were hundreds, if not thousands, of aimed blaster barrels, all pointing directly at the Imperial and her scant remaining sisters. Sando was standing over his general's right shoulder, sword held tightly in his right hand, blaster pistol clutched firmly in his left and aimed directly for the face of the Sister of Battle before them. Around her, the other sisters were being driven back to better cover, the fanatics being chased away. Their withdrawal becoming little more than a hastened retreat as they were pursued by trails of overlapping blaster fire and molten, dripping ceramite. The winged warrior scowled, the expression becoming a feral branding upon what may have been beautiful features, as Ayla raised her free hand. "Soldiers of the Grand Army of the Republic," said the Jedi Master, "advance!" The troopers opened fire, and the Imperial barely managed to activate her rockets quickly enough to launch herself back towards her own forces, on an arcing bow of smoke, crumbling armor, and bright blue blaster bolts. The final battle for Axum's reconquest would begin here, and it would begin now.
This'll be interesting. I don't know about that. Oh, Lazarus, the boy!
Lazarus sat amidst the beds and hanging white linens of the medical triage tents. He was not in one. That privilege was reserved for the survivors of his mission, who lay and sat around him, groaning and gasping as they bore their many agonies. He had been in this setting before, but never like this. Most of the wounded were silent, some lost in prayer even as the Sisters Hospitaller moved between them, treating them with various drugs, medicines, and hooking them into life-saving machinery where it was required. But, in whatever state the wounded were in, the vast majority of them, or rather the ones with at least one eye remaining to them, if not both, kept those eyes firmly locked onto him.
Yeah, man,
They acted as
came
though
back
he
to
were
life.
the Emperor's own messenger, sent from his side with vital portents. Their expressions were hopeful, desperate, reverent, and filled with a religious infatuation that he had never once imagined falling on him. He was a soldier, a guardsman,
It's a
the
big
Emperor's
deal.
hammer, not his word-bearer. Yet, in his hands, limply clamped between cold, numb fingers, was a certificate meant for his next of kin, his own death certificate. Columbia had been abandoned, most of its population coming with the Zectec fleet, while the remainder purposefully activated their planet's maligned lockdown in the hopes that the presence of the dead, frozen sphere would attract no unwanted Tyranid attention. However, even had the whole world packed up and left, Lazarus was the last of his line, the last of his name. But
Well,
instead
that's
of
gonna
being
change now.
printed and burned, as would have been standard, the certificate was instead given to him, the waxy paper held limply in his hands as his eyes blankly scanned.
He's gonna
the
get so many
faces around
ladies
him.
now.
He'd been shot, almost point blank, with a bolt pistol. He died. And then, at the touch of the holy canoness, he had been restored to life. And
I
since
wanna
that
know what he
moment,
saw.
He had not spoken even a single word. The truth was, he had no words to say. He had returned
fair.
feeling utterly empty, as though his soul was only slowly trickling back into his body, his mind still in shock. He had died in seconds of the blast, his heart halting from the shock of it and leaving him to experience only moments of his own death. That had proven painful, and painful far beyond his expectations of what dying of shock would have been like.
Yeah, that would suck.
But at least that had lasted only moments. Coming back, however, had been a whole different kind of hurt. The agony that had been poured over him, mind, body, and soul, as he was wrenched from Doom's rigid grasp and forced back into his body had been exquisitely unique, and the pain of it had devoured his every thought throughout. He did not doubt that many who watched him assumed that he was struck speechless by the majesty of the Emperor and his brief but potent time within the afterlife. The reality was that the trauma of coming back to life had stolen his language from him, and even as it came back into his mind, the former guardsman had no idea what to say, or even what to think. In a single day, he'd gone from wearing the flak and fatigues of a sergeant to the carapace and uniform of a major, and now to what he was wrapped in. Stripped out of his former attire by the sister who had washed and tended his remaining wounds after his resurrection, he now wore bright white robes composed of bleached sackcloth, utterly unmarked and unmarred by any other addition, save for the rough hemp belt which was tied around his waist.
Oh.
The garment was itchy and rough, but also light and clean. He was here to be watched for complications, but the sisters around him worked with utter faith that he had been saved, and were among the least likely to be caught staring at Lazarus, occupied by their own work. He'd avoided speaking to any of them, to anyone at all. He knew they would ask him about what had happened and what he had seen and felt. Lazarus needed to be strong. He needed to stand so that the soldiers around him, now looking to him more than ever, could stand as well. He needed to give faith and strength to the warriors around him, even if he had little left for himself. But he knew that if he spoke, if he was asked to recall his experience, that he would be unable to remain unbent. He knew that he would falter and fall. And for a man who was chosen as a leader in war, this was simply not an option.
At least he's aware of
He
it.
shifted his mind, instead choosing to focus on how grateful he was towards the canoness. Not for saving his life, though he did appreciate that as well, or rather, he knew he would eventually. No, he was grateful for her forceful assignment of him and his men to this duty, guarding the medical camp which had been set up just behind the battle lines.
Yeah, they
Naturally,
needed a break.
this meant that his soldiers had first access to its services, something they sorely needed. And though his least injured and most alert men were put to the first guard, all of his beleaguered soldiers found themselves with something hot to drink and warm to eat, if they could stomach it, which he knew they would. They were excellent soldiers, after all. Then Lazarus became aware of something, a tremble, an approach. He felt it through the floor and in the air, and then soon in the form of a commotion outside the tent. At first, he had thought that the enemy were firing a new weapon, but soon realized it was coming from the wrong direction for that to be the case. The sound was too regular and growing louder too rapidly to be a weapon. A great mechanical roar shook the air, drawing unheard screams and cries from the soldiers around him. The earth trembled and then quaked as a vast, vaguely humanoid shadow swept across and over the tents.
Oh,
Medical
what?
implements falling to the ground
is
as
it
something huge
the support
leapt
vehicles?
over them. Then it was past and drawing further and further away. "Oh, what in the feck was that?" yelled a large Cadian who was strapped down to a medical bed and being attended by 3 hospitaller at once. The statement was soon echoed in thoughts and voices by nearly all inside the tent, though Lazarus would sit tranquil throughout. "Victory," Lazarus said, drawing all eyes once he spoke.
Oh.
"It is victory," he said again, for Lazarus knew that sound, though only from simulations. Murmurs and questions filled the time after his voice, but Lazarus did not speak again, and, luckily for him, he did not need to. Minutes later, the tent flaps flew open, and a scrawny Vestillan recruit clambered in, trembling from head to toe as he carried an unconscious, wounded woman. He barely made it 3 steps before just as many sisters met him, 2 taking the woman from him wordlessly and laying her down on a nearby bed, while the 3rd took him gently but firmly by the arm and led him to another place to rest. "Hey, Vasti!" a wounded Cadian corporal called from nearby. The man jerked his head nervously in her direction.
It's just like the simulations, yes.
Yes? He asked. "You... feck! Burning thrones, sister, that hurts!" She groaned as the hospitaller at her bedside inserted a long needle into her. "It'll hurt worse if you keep using that kind of language in here, Cadian. I'm almost certain you'll live, so appreciate this pain." The woman grimaced at the sister's pronouncement and redirected her attention to the new arrival. "Did you get a good look at whatever it was that jumped over the camp?" she asked. He nodded nervously. "Well, spit it out then."
It almost looked like he's
after a couple
doing...
of seconds went by. "Oh, that's the knight," the man muttered.
A knight?
"The what? A knight? An Imperial knight? I thought we lost all our local heavy support when they hammered into the auxiliary base."
It's okay,
The
got
woman
it.
blurted out. Murmurs and excited chatter began to spread at those words. Everyone present who knew what an Imperial
understand
knight
now.
was
Okay, the
knew
stories are
exactly
coming
what
together.
it could do for this fight. Lazarus himself had guessed as much from the sound of the thing, and felt a greater elation sink into him at the confirmation. "Yeah, the base fell. Our squad managed to find the pilot, though. Most of us died getting her down there, but we did it. Lost the sergeant, lost everyone but the rookie and the corporal, but we..." The muttering man was cut off then, as a cheer rose from the beleaguered soldiers around him. His eyes widened, and he flinched back as though the mass of voiced gratitude might strike him physically. "That makes you lot a bunch of throne-damned heroes!" the Cadian declared, barely making her voice heard through the cacophony. The man looked around, his eyes still wide as he pressed his palms to his ears. Lazarus raised his hands, and in a few moments enough had seen to quiet the room. "We'd been hoping for a Bane Blade, or any other super heavy support.
Blade!
A knight is a blessing from the Emperor himself. Take pride, guardsmen. You and your squad, alive or dead, have very likely saved this entire operation. The scrawny man blushed, his pale face reddening even more as the words were followed by the eyes and attention of everyone who could turn to see him. Honestly, I just operated the elevator. The real blessing was the lack of artillery fire. From how hard our base had been hammered at the start, I had been worried that we'd never make it more than 5 steps from the Mechanicus Temple before those distant cannons turned us to dust. Don't know what they decided to fire on instead of us, but I bet they chose wrong, the blushing soldier said sheepishly. The room around him silenced for a moment, all eyes staring a little more intensely at the man, who seemed to notice and tense up himself. What? What'd I say? He asked a moment later, voice high-pitched. The room broke into laughter at that, and though the scrawny man had no way of knowing the joke, he soon began to laugh along with them nonetheless.
Bum, 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 bum.
Something's going on. Crosshair hissed from where he hid.
Yeah, you think?
Wrecker chortled not far away, hiding behind a large statue of some kind of machine man. This one evidently venerated instead of being a slave. Quiet, both of you, Hunter snapped. They were all hiding, waiting. They had been traversing the bizarre temple, pausing to deactivate sensors and sneak around personnel, when suddenly and without apparent trigger, an alarm began to blare. The resonance of it made clear to the clones that it wasn't just blaring here, but all across the temple, maybe even across the whole ship. Naturally, they had taken cover and hidden, and not a moment too soon, as a veritable battalion of droidmen, all rapidly marching in perfect synchronicity, entered the chamber they had been within. But no sooner had they entered than they crossed and exited once more. The phenomenon repeated itself again 3 more times before a general stillness settled upon the room once more. The alarm still blared, but in the absence of any more traffic, Hunter waved his men forward, and it was not long before they found the access terminal within the room. Tech began to interface it with his datapad, and the others gathered around, keeping watch. Fingers crossed, Crosshair said, and Hunter could only nod, kneeling with his rifle out as he waited. Time passed, but in the end, all the machine produced was a dissatisfied groan, voiced by Tech. Again? Wrecker asked, exasperated. Are we even in the right place? He added. He's got a point, Tech.
Oh.
You sure we're looking in the right place? Hunter asked. Tech crossed his arms and rubbed his chin. Yes, there's no doubt about it. Even if the control systems were not here, the access terminals in this place are comprehensive and widely tethered throughout the ship. In basic? Crosshair asked. It means that, even if it weren't here, the terminals would tell us where it is anyway, Tech said. Except they're not, Hunter added silently, and Tech nodded, frustration writ clear on his face. Look alive, Crosshair said. Single target, just came in through a maintenance hatch, he added a moment later, eyes fixed on his raised scope. Clone Force 99 took cover once more, hiding in the shadow of the pillars as the figure made his way closer and closer, going for the very same access panel they had been using only moments ago. The red-robed figure skulked, looking around suspiciously, as though he were the one being hunted, though Hunter gathered that it was more likely he was using the alarm as a distraction to do something not so sanctioned of his own. And that gave him an idea. He crept down and drew his vibroblade, inching in from the man's blind spot. What are you doing? Crosshair hissed as he passed. Trying a different source, Hunter whispered back. Cover me, he ordered. His brothers did so, and soon Hunter was nearly directly behind the man. He was tapping and typing away frantically on the terminal's key interface, avoiding a direct link for some reason, despite the many mechanical tendrils he had about his covered body. Suddenly, the man paused and tensed, spinning around only to find the point of Hunter's knife in his face, and 3 other clones aiming weapons at him from over his shoulders. The hooded figure slowly raised its arms in surrender.
This isn't what it seems like?
The man asked, oddly nonchalant about his words, which he voiced more like a question, clearly a terrible liar. His words were
It's the
spoken
guy.
in one of the new Imperial
it's the not
languages,
call.
but Hunter's armor-mounted translator made short work of it and translated his own words back when he responded. "And what does it not look like?" he asked. The machine man seemed to cringe and shrug.
I certainly was not fleeing confinement, and I also was not seeking a way to escape this subpar laboratory.
The red-robed
Yeah,
man
there it
said, a deserter's hesitance tainting his voice. Not that Hunter knew to recognize it. The sergeant shrugged. "I don't care. We have questions we need answered. A bomb was placed on the 4th planet in this system, a planet cracker. We need access to its control systems, and I'm afraid I can't take no for an answer," the clone commando said, bringing his blade closer. The red-robed man paused, tilting his head curiously, though he kept his hands up.
You're not lab security, are you? You're
yeah, no.
Republic Replicate. Infiltrators! Oh, then I take back everything I just said. I am definitely trying to escape this place, and I am certainly fleeing this disastrously insufficient excuse for a laboratory.
This time, the clone found himself blinking in brief confusion.
What?
"I told you, I don't care. Will you take us to the control system for the bomb or not?" he asked.
Oh, but you should care.
The man said brightly.
I'll gladly take you. I know exactly where it is, in fact. Your
Wow.
goal is on the way to where I myself am going. But, in exchange, you must promise to help me make my appointment so that I can escape this place. If I am forced to produce even one more design for that ungrateful and uninspired disgrace upon the title of Magos, I'll seriously reconsider self-termination. Though, it would go against the lore to do such a thing.
"What's he saying?" Wrecker asked. "He's offering to show us where the bomb controls are in exchange for a ride out of here, I think," Tech explained.
Well, this is gonna be interesting.
Hunter paused, looking at the man and considering his offer. The alarm was still blaring, and if the cause of it was not them or this man, then it was most likely General Skywalker. He was a mighty Jedi, no doubt about it, but even he could not take on the entire ship. They were running out of time,
wouldn't
and a
think that,
guide
though.
more sensible than a mindless trash droid would be more than useful, maybe even invaluable. "All right, fine. You lead us to the controls and help us get out of here, and we'll take you the rest of the way," he said, spinning his blade back and sliding it into his sheath.
Agreed!
The robed man said. The other clones looked at Hunter hesitantly, but lowered their weapons at a nod from him as he led the red-robed man back to them. "This is a mistake," Crosshair muttered as he passed. "Maybe," Hunter whispered back. "So keep your trigger ready," he added. Crosshair nodded subtly and backed away, going to stand by Wrecker as the strange man came amongst them. Hunter turned to face him again and pointed with his thumb towards his own chest. "Name's Hunter, by the way. Behind me is Tech, tall one is Crosshair, and the big one over there is Wrecker," he said, extending a hand towards the Imperial. The man stared at it in what seemed
they don't
open
shake
delight
hands.
for a couple of moments before taking it and shaking it, emulating Hunter's grip and posture perfectly.
A pleasure to meet you, Hunter, Tech, Crosshair, and Wrecker. I am designated as Quo. Magos Quo 84, at your service.
Yep, there it is. Whoa. He has quite a personality compared to the other Quos that we're aware of.
Tarweiler leaned against a broken, bent wall of metal. Once part of a building that had been reduced to nearly nothing by the searing touch of
this
energy
guy.
weapons. His black eyes shimmered in the deep shadow that was cut by the jagged arch of alien steel, shielding him from the light and rain as he stood sentinel over the carnage around him. The clones fought like men possessed, and the Inquisitor knew that the sentiment was more than a metaphor, having egressed from theatrics into the realm of distinct possibilities. But, be that as it may, they were being beaten back by Commissar Tyrandor and his accompanying forces. The near melee had been at a standstill for several minutes, but as mauled as the Commissar's numbers had been, these clones had clearly already been party to vicious fighting, and their coordination and discipline had begun to evaporate as fury conquered duty, and exhaustion threatened imminence upon their entire army. The Imperium's forces were, by comparison, relatively fresh and ready for combat. And, apparently, this was all thanks to the acts of some new saint or hero who had revealed himself and martyred himself to save them from the dishonorable tactics of the Jedi. This, and more, he had learned from a medic who had tended to his injuries. A man referred to as Panic by the others around him. Despite the worrying moniker, the man had seemed remarkably calm and steady-handed, something even experienced medics often had trouble achieving when working on Tar's less personable visage. His mind could scarcely dwell on appreciating the man's nerve, however, before the guardsmen managed to retrieve Tarweiler's rogue traitor. As was to be expected, the fool had come to them himself, insisting on being a part of the adventure whenever possible. So, he had been in the front row when his gun cutter had been blasted out of the sky. His heavy, scorched body was dragged out of the wreckage and towards the medics at an urgent pace, and it was easy to see why. Burnt from scalp to toenails, partially fused into his stylish and now half-molten flight suit. The man was a screaming, convulsing mess, and one which would be lucky to survive. Tar watched it all from his place under the bent wall, left alone as Panic rushed to aid the more grievously wounded of the two. The Inquisitor feeling the cold of the rain he was drenched in for the first time, and shivering to the sound of blaster fire and death. He briefly considered rejoining the fight and lending his strength to the soldiers who had rescued him, but dismissed the thought. Omni Craden and Jakal were still waiting within the outpost, which Tar had only barely managed to keep the guardsmen out of. His mind was smoking with frustration, his plan turning and adjusting into the circumstances. He'd need to contact his man at the Basilica of Salvation, Major Flecken. Tar doubted he would be able to covertly reach and disable the spaceport from his current situation, which meant the plan needed to accelerate. The very thought was fury itself. His plan had been so well executed until now, like dominoes carrying themselves to the ground, with only a touch here and a touch there required. But now, the pattern was flawed, and a more direct approach would need to be taken. He had planned on relying on the escalating situation to force the hand of the sisters who controlled the Basilica. In this, Major Flecken was vital, both as another subtle push.
He is like, let's do politics while we're fighting. Wow, very helpful. Very, very cool, dude. Thanks.
And as the hand himself, should the need arise. And it appeared that it had. That hand he had prepared needed to be signaled to squeeze the trigger on a weapon that would end the world and everything on it.
But first, the timing had to be
Exterminatus!
just right, and his exit needed to be secured. Already, Tar had predicted that the Republic's many naval forces would be arriving in the system shortly, if they had not entered from the beginning already. He needed to both ensure the weapon's activation and secure his own escape from the world before it fired. With his rogue traitor near death, his forbidden assets very nearly exposed, and his hand almost revealed, the Inquisitor knew that the task before him would be a tricky one, but one which was far from impossible for the likes of him. And his first step was to contact Major Flecken. He watched the medics toil over his friend for a time longer before slinking away.
You'd call him a
and
friend.
moving towards
Interesting.
a communications officer.
Wouldn't have
The
guessed.
man was relaying commands through the heavy Vox relay pack on his shoulders, kneeling behind the stationary form of a chimera, and turned away from the battle as he did his duty. Tar stood over him at just enough of an angle that the man would catch his sharp, toothed face in the side view of his vision. The Inquisitor was already smiling, even before the man snapped his eyes back towards him, as Tar had expected he would. The officer almost hesitated in the stream of information he was relaying, managing to impress the monstrous Imperial servant who leered over him. In spite of Wyler's obvious rank and disturbing appearance, the man did not halt until his task was completed. He then
Good job,
pivoted,
buddy.
still on one knee, and saluted. "Inquisitor," the surprisingly stalwart guardsman said. "How may I serve?"
Can you reach the Basilica of Salvation with that setup?
Tar asked. The man did not respond right away, first placing a hand against the heavy earpiece and speaker he wore on his head, his other hand manipulating the various knobs and switches on his Vox relay. After a few moments had passed, he gave a sharp nod. "Yes, sir. Connection is viable."
Good. Get me in
Ew.
contact with Major Flecken right now.
The Inquisitor demanded. The man nodded in response and began to dial in his Vox codes. Despite the fluidity of his actions, the Inquisitor could not help but notice how long the task was taking, and how the man was forced to stop and verbally navigate with those of the Basilica. As he sought the Major, Tar felt the tightness in his gut long before the news arrived. "I'm sorry, Inquisitor," the man said at last, "but it appears Major Flecken is dead. He was assassinated by a Jedi witch earlier today." The news was
There
like
it
a
is.
slap in the face. How much had been slipping out of place while he had been absent? How on Terra had Flecken gotten himself killed? He had been instructed to stall the deployment of Imperial forces from the Basilica, so he should have been surrounded by fortifications. How by the Emperor had he managed to get himself killed even then? Tar shoved the thoughts aside. The task was now that much more difficult, and he needed to adjust accordingly. Without a man on the inside, he would need to rely on his original plan, that of creating a situation so dire, the Basilica's commanding authority would have no choice but to activate the temple's final failsafe. But it all needed to happen so much faster now.
Get me in touch with Imperial Command at the Basilica. Anyone with authority who is not a part of the Ministorum or Sororita.
The Inquisitor began to say. He was cut off when the Vox officer suddenly rose up and, with both hands, shoved Wyler back,
Oh,
with enough force to throw the Inquisitor.
there was
Tar
an
was sent
assassination
pitching
attempt.
across the broken street, caught totally off guard as he fell hard onto the tarnished floor. He released a less than human growl from his altered throat and curled into a sitting position in time to see the next attack coming. The Inquisitor rolled into a ball as he pitched himself backward, springing away in a gymnastic maneuver he had taught himself after watching a pair of Death Cult assassins earning their names. The springing withdrawal allowed him to evade maiming or death at the hands of the burning green sword which spun through the air, tearing molten furrows into the ground where Tar had just been laying. The Inquisitor landed in a crouch that saw his thin-bladed black rapier drawn out into the faltering rain. He knew what he would find waiting for him even before his dark eyes met those of his attacker.
Yep.
A tan-skinned human Jedi leered from between a tangle of dreadlocks strewn across a grinning face. A single yellow tattooed line striping the bridge of the man's nose and underlining each of his intense, faintly yellow eyes. His extended hand was empty until the spinning blade of his light-based power sword returned to it with a snap. The Jedi was in his own crouch, blade held horizontally as it sizzled in the cold drizzle. Beneath and just behind the man was the bisected corpse of the Vox officer
Rip.
who must have seen the man approaching
What a
and saved Tarweiler's life at the
Man.
expense of his own. At first, Tar had assumed he had been found by yet another Jedi in the same way as before, but this was proven false seconds later as his eyes began to notice the descending bodies and blades of the Republic's witch knights.
Oh.
They glided down from on high by the powers of the warp, falling upon the guardsmen around them with swords of merciless, pitiless light. And, looking back into the eyes of his newest opponent, Tar could see that the warrior had drunken deeply of the warp's dark depths, for they reeked of its maligned power. "You look like someone important." "That's really very surprising, given how inhuman you look," said the Jedi, slowly rising, lazily spinning his saber.
Humanity is defined by the spirit more than by the flesh.
Tar said, beginning to blur, preparing for battle. The Jedi shrugged, strolling to the left, away from the cover the Vox officer had been making use of, distancing himself from that impediment. "If you say so. Now, listen well to what I say. Surrender. Right now. It's the only chance you'll get. I can promise you humane treatment, you and whoever else joins you," said the light-wielding warrior. The Inquisitor laughed in response.
And I invite you to take a knee and lay down your arms. I promise you a quick death if you do.
Tar answered, his grin wide and monstrous. The Jedi shrugged again, though this time the movement was little more than a bob of his shoulders. "All right, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to do to you what I've done to every other Force wielder I found from your empire. Don't say I didn't warn you," he said, hopping lightly on his toes before beginning to close with Tar. The Inquisitor swept his sword out in open challenge before driving in point first. The blow appeared physical, yet it was nothing but a mask, a veneer covering the true strike beneath it. As his blade moved forward in its predictable path, Tar lobbed forth an invisible javelin of screaming energy towards the Jedi. A bolt of concentrated suffering and sorrow Tar had drawn and saved from his most bedraggled victims.
Oh, that's
The
terrible.
Inquisitor could see the moment his hidden attack connected, well ahead of the pointed pinnacle of his bladed lunge. The Jedi had fallen into a lower stance once more, blade prepared to parry, when his expression rippled, changing like the surface of a previously still pond, going from a smirk of assured confidence to a look of sudden shock. And just like that, Tarweiler had the fool! Or so he thought. But the man's blade continued its parry, his feet shuffling with coordinated intent before he moved in, not away. The lithe, lethal form of the Jedi adopted bizarre,
please kill that
precise
guy.
movements which gracefully
I would
turned
like
the
the Inquisitor
Inquisitor's
dead.
blow aside, almost pulling him past the warrior's dervishing body, leaving him more and more exposed. The Challenger released his burning sword of light, catching it in his other hand as he continued to twist, snapping the blade out of the air and swinging it across Tarweiler's lunging body. The Inquisitor's warp-accelerated mind struggled to understand the feint, to understand how the man had taken his lance of pain without so much as stumbling. The Jedi's shocked expression melted in the course of a second, becoming a wicked grin of born teeth and triumphant, fiery eyes. Eyes which shone between dark dreadlocks like flames within the abyss. The change snapped Weiler back to his instincts in the final second, twitching his thoughts in a last hope, activating a medal on his chest which doubled as a safety device. It was meant for avoiding ranged attacks predominantly, and using it like this was dangerous. But he had no time to even think, barely any time to activate it. The blade connected with Tar's side, scorching the man and biting into him effortlessly. Then there was a flash, and the Inquisitor was gone, reappearing in the same instant, upside down and 5 feet in the air, to the left of where they had begun. He barely had the sense to catch himself, rolling into a low crouch and hissing, body dripping still despite the death of the rain. He clutched his side, the 2.5-inch wide cut there becoming a brand of pure agony, though it had been cauterized shut. The sun began to cut beams of light back into the sky, making the black-eyed Imperial squint as the Jedi stood, blade flourishing in his stance, grin still widely displayed as he reoriented on the Inquisitor. Tar grit his teeth, but was nonetheless thankful that he had been repositioned in the air, and not into the floor beneath them. Had he tried that in a room with a ceiling... slippery, aren't you? The Jedi said.
How did you do that?
This guy has so much
The
riz.
Inquisitor snapped in response.
My mind, Lance. How did you... What did you do?
He demanded again. Mind Lance. Oh, you mean your little dark side magic just now.
Ooh.
I assume this means you haven't encountered Vapad before.
Yep.
The man said as he drew closer.
Hi,
The
fan.
Inquisitor tried to rise, but the pain from his saber wound almost drew the waking world out of him, and he was forced to remain on his knees, barely able to move at all. He kicked back and away as best he could, though the Jedi kept pace with him casually.
Vapad?
The Inquisitor spat. The Jedi nodded. Yup, Vapad. I'm not even all that good at using it, but it's enough. He said before halting suddenly. The Inquisitor kept scrambling back, and when he was not pursued, he looked around, half expecting to find a Grox bearing down on him. Instead, Commissar Tyrandor strode towards Tarweiler's fallen form, dropping a stem pack into the Inquisitor's lap as he passed the man, chainsword held forward with one hand, drawing a las pistol with the other. Enough for two, I hope, the Commissar said, revving his chainsword as Tar
Dang
took
it.
the stem pack and jammed it into his thigh. The Jedi still smiled, though his eyes had hardened and the turn of his lips had become less triumphant and more vicious as his kill was interceded. Tarweiler was panting, feeling heat flaring up from his injected leg and filling the rest of his body with a pulsating, numbing flame. I'll see what I can do for you, the Jedi said as he began to circle to the left again. Inquisitor, Tyrandor said, voice tight. You need to escape. I have a modified chimera waiting for you further up the road. They have your pilot stabilized inside. Take it and run, the Commissar said. Tar scowled, and slowly stood, wincing from the damage at his side and working some of his warp arts over the wound. He was hardly an adept healer, but it was better than nothing, and killing the nerves near the worst of the damage would help him fight. Jakal and Omni Kraden were still waiting for him inside the outpost, and so turning back now was not an option.
Negative, Commissar. You've saved my life twice now. I will not let that debt mature any further.
Tar growled as he called his fallen rapier back into his hand, and staggered into line beside the red and black garbed Imperial commander, raising said weapon.
Formidable though he may be, we can defeat this witch together.
The Inquisitor added, "You wouldn't put any credits on that if you had any sense. I've tangled with Sith Lords, Jedi Hunters, and surprisingly spry bounty hunters. Yet here I stand. And I'll even let you in on one little secret. As scary as I may be, I'm not the only one who can use Vapor. Hell, I'm not even the best one at it. Not even close." The Jedi boasted, shoulders laid back in a casual posture. And I'll tell you another. You'll never see the blades of either of the two Jedi who can beat me at this game. Because you stopped playing. Right here. Right now.
Saffron felt himself fading, his consciousness wavering
This
even
must be
as he
Michael,
contended with the remaining
that guy.
Jedi. He was so close, so close. He knew he should withdraw, should find solace, yet his enemy was all but vanquished, and he would not return to his master with words of retreat. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. Saffron would not allow himself to fail this creed. But even so, fury and frenzy would not be enough to carry him through. He took a defensive stance, allowing the Jedi to come to him instead of he to them. Using both hands, he held his stave wide, catching their strikes and measuring their movements. Both were wounded and slowed by their injuries, but none more than Saffron himself, who felt the blood vessels in his eyes bursting as he strained to remain mobile. Obi-Wan was carrying a limp, his healed shin still evidently ailing him as he tried to stand on it, and Mace Windu was burned, with small clumps of painfully molten but hardening metal fused into spots on his robe and skin. Most of the Jedi had escaped by now, but even so, if Saffron could crush these last two, their order would follow. If
That is
not
true.
literal truth, then in spirit. But he was fighting with just one heart, and with two of his lungs pierced and filling with blood. It oozed from his mouth and out of his wound, and even then the only thing that kept him upright was his telekinesis. Inside the bloody hole left by the saber which had pierced his heart, he forced the mostly ruined muscle to continue beating, painfully massaging it with his powers, while capping the holes as best he could. It was the roughest of patches, but it sufficed, with the help of his second heart, to keep him upright. Having 3 lungs saved him from suffocation, but only just. The result was a man who needed to use all his psychic focus to
Yeah,
keep himself
he's
from
still not doing
dying
hot.
of heart failure, all the while dueling 2 skilled but wounded opponents. The fight would not last much longer now. Obi-Wan came in high, Mace Windu low. In response, Saffron attacked Obi-Wan, relying on the warrior's instinct to drive him back into the defensive once he saw the stave being swung towards him, intending for Kenobi to dodge away. It happened just as Saffron had predicted, with the Jedi abandoning his attack to bend backwards, choosing to evade in place of parry or block to spare his wounded shin. Harnessing that momentum, Saffron pivoted, continuing the swing to intercept with Mace Windu while sweeping with his left leg, aiming that one for Kenobi. Again, the Jedi Guardian avoided the strike, though Mace did not avoid his. Catching the blade on a hard-locking block, the bald master pushed, and Saffron gave way, knowing that Kenobi was still recovering from avoiding his leg sweep, and therefore isolating Windu for a few precious seconds. Saffron held his breath, blood gushing in a sudden torrent from his mouth and wound as he released his hold, redirecting his psychic force into acceleration, trading a rapid flurry of blows with Windu before Obi-Wan could step in again. He laid into the Jedi, but the Master did the same, expressing strength far beyond what was natural as he met blade with stave and gauntlet with fist. Saffron felt his sight flickering, his reflexes slowing in spite of himself. "Go down!" Windu bellowed, agony ripe on his features as his skin and muscles flexed against the fused bits of metal across his body, tearing and blistering, filling him with as much pain as exasperation. Saffron sneered, but the expression fell away as Obi-Wan joined in. He retracted his speed and Windu backed off with a hard gasp, allowing Kenobi to step back in. The librarian nearly swooned, clenching his staff hard to bring back his focus, hammering down on the Jedi Master, but unable to breach what remained of his defenses before Mace drove in again. The Space Marine decided then to focus on Windu, the one who had dealt so much damage to him already.
Is this the best you can do? Here I stand, heartless, lungs full of blood, and weary of a day from slaughtering your pathetic order, and still you struggle. What hope have you, if this is all you have to offer?
Saffron mocked. Obi-Wan ignored the remark completely, falling into serenity, but not Mace Windu. Though he did not respond directly with his words, his anger grew and he pressed in harder. The epistolary grinned, seeing his chance beginning to emerge. They exchanged a few more blows before both parties backed off, each man barely on their feet.
Too weak to finish the task at hand?
The Space Marine panted through deadly exhaustion. "I don't see you putting an end to this task either," said Mace Windu,
There are two
eyes
of you.
blazing, becoming twin rings of fiery light. To his surprise, the Marine laughed, loud and exaggerated, extending his arms toward the smears and bodies which remained all around them. Blood seeped from between his teeth,
he has kind of
coloring his chin as
gotten
he
a lot
made
of
the
them.
hideous sound and spread his legs a bit more, wavering only slightly.
Then you should look closer, Jedi. I've been ending tasks like you all day.
He boomed.
Ooh.
Windu gripped his saber and
Yeah.
raised it,
Oh,
eyes
he's mad.
wide with unrelenting rage. He roared and charged forward, not waiting or signaling to the recovering Obi-Wan. "Master Windu, wait!" Kenobi yelled, but it was too late to stop him. Mace charged in and forced Obi-Wan to follow, half-cocked. Saffron grinned a brilliant red smile and threw himself toward them, meeting the two warriors halfway, surprising both. Again, Obi-Wan fell into his defensive instincts, and Mace fell into his offensive ones. Saffron knew he had but one chance to finish this quickly, or his endurance would fail before the Jedi did. He exchanged another flurry of blows with the Jedi Master, but this time, as Windu's companion made to rejoin the fight, Saffron intentionally exposed himself for a strike. It was a trap, and one he feared would be too obvious, but true to his aggression, Mace Windu seized on it the instant he could. The Corran Master bellowed, voice dripping in vicious desire as he plunged his purple blade into Saffron's armor, piercing it over the Marine's right rib plate and burning through it with the blow, lancing his already wounded lungs once more. But before Mace's blade arm could be withdrawn, it was suddenly locked, seized by Saffron's left fist. the librarian releasing his stave altogether, one hand grasping Mace's forearm and holding him there, while the other hammered down to pulp the master's head.
Yep, there he is.
No! Obi-Wan cried, moving faster than he'd ever had before, faster than he ever moved since. Blade falling from his own hands as he threw himself into a lunge, tackling Mace from the left and throwing the both of them out of the way, wrenching Mace's arm painfully out of Saffron's grip, breaking it.
Yeah.
Yes!
Saffron roared triumphant as he followed the trajectory of the two with his eyes. Denied their footwork, blades, and defense, Saffron took his chance and relinquished his telekinetic heart once more in order to extend his hands out, issuing forth a torrent of demonic lightning which spilled from his hand and towards the Jedi. Kenobi hit a pillar with Master Windu still in his arms, attempting to rebound and escape away, but his weakened shin failed to support him, and the hesitation born from that doomed them both. Kenobi and Windu began to scream as the sneaking bolts of warp power caught them, beginning to cook the two of them alive. Obi-Wan curled and flailed, trying to crawl away but losing all control of his body. All the while, Saffron laughed, adding his other hand, roasting the Jedi as he did so. It lasted all of 5 seconds, and then stopped abruptly. There was a flash and an odd sound that neither Saffron nor the other Jedi had ever heard before. Kenobi was surprised to find himself still alive and breathing, gasping out a puff of smoke and, with trembling exertion, looking up towards his assailant. There he stood, tall and confused, blinking as he stared first at his now powerless hands, and then down lower, the nearly foot-wide hole that had appeared in his chest.
Gonna say
Without
he's
falling,
dead.
but beginning to falter, the Marine turned around to look behind himself, only to grunt loudly as another brilliant fount of energy emerged from behind him and struck him again, growing the hole even wider, leaving no room for his 2 hearts or 3 lungs in the empty, burnt space that was his chest.
Dang it, he can't even become a
This
dreadnought
did
now.
force Saffron to his knees, the Marine collapsing like a puppet with his strings cut, barely staying up on his hands. An enormous gout of chemical-smelling blood drooled from his mouth and began to well thickly around his wound. Still, he saw with clear eyes the face of his killer, the old woman.
Oh,
She'd
she had
assembled
the
some
weapon.
kind of melt-a-gun behind his back.
That's right. I remember
the one
now.
with a range that far surpassed any he'd yet seen. She stood there, weapon raised and sighted as though she would shoot him again, though after a second or two she looked up from the leveled gun.
Well done.
Saffron croaked.
Name?
He added, choking on blood and a lack of oxygen. In response, she raised one of her gray eyebrows. Windu stood up at that moment, cradling his broken arm and walking towards them, standing over the fallen Astartes and releasing his wounded limb, calling his saber to his hand, activating it and lifting it. "Wait," said Jocasta, and with great difficulty, Mace held his blade raised but still.
You
Your
guys,
name? I would know it.
The Marine said, pushing air
no,
up.
here's the thing. You don't share that information. You know why? Because right before he dies, he's gonna tell his brethren. He's like, okay, if he doesn't take her out right now, he's gonna tell his brethren. He's gonna be like, yo, this chick, Jocasta, just took me out. You better avenge me, homies. Like, you don't do that. You don't do that.
His ruined throat with the power of the warp. "I am Jedi Master Jocasta Nu. Take my name to your god and pray he does not force me to send more of you with it," said the rigid old woman. Saffron laughed, making a horrible sound which forced him to vomit forth a whole pool of unnatural blood.
Are you master among these Jedi?
He panted, arms trembling. She shook her head no, though he could no longer see her, only hear her. "I am Chief Librarian of the Jedi Order,"
He's
she
like,
said to the dying
"Oh."
man.
He's like, "Oh, I see now. Well, okay then."
The words seemed to shock him, but then he smiled one last time and began to laugh again, first with what little false air he had left to push into his vocal cords, and then silently as he lost the strength to continue. He looked up at her, eyes blood red, all the vessels having burst. He mouthed something to her, having no power left to give air to his words, and then gradually fell still. Mace waited, and then slowly lowered his blade, stepping away from the mountainous corpse of the Astartes. His eyes did not leave the dead man, reaching out with his mind to confirm his death, yet was rebuffed by the ambient wards which persisted in the librarian's armor. "What did he say to you?" Mace Windu asked Master Jocasta Nu. She grimaced and raised the barrel of her weapon towards the dome's ceiling, convinced the Marine was dead at last. She looked at Mace, though he did not look back. He said, "Stifle that guttering flame of hope, for I am not alone, and I am not the greatest of my brothers. 2 more stand above me, and they shall teach you the lesson I could not," said Jocasta Nu. Mace turned then, finally looking away from the Marine. "Did he say what that lesson was?" he asked her. The wizened librarian nodded stiffly. Mace waited, but she did not speak right away. Instead, she looked from him to an empty space on a distant wall, seeming grayer and older than he had ever seen in that moment. "And?" he asked Master Nu. She snapped her eyes back to him and straightened. "His lesson was, hope is the first step on the road to disappointment."
Well, yeah. That makes sense. That was a good one. I love that fight. I'm a little sad that Saffron died. I liked him. It's okay though. It's okay. I'll carry on. I will survive. We will go with the next episode, which is 2 hours. Thereabouts. She said the thing. I know, she said the thing. Alright, I'm gonna take more gamer subs. There we go. We continue. I like doing these. These are fun. The vibes are just chill. Ba, 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 ba. Sins of the arrogant. Oh boy, I could list off a lot of people.
Ayla panted, puffing strained breaths through her nose as her legs pumped beneath her, accelerated beyond natural speed. 4 of the armored fanatics turned, as if sensing her approach, all 3 wielding melee weapons, while the 4th among them hefted a thickly decorated flamethrower. The sisters spread out as much as they could as she closed with them, weapons raising as they screamed mindless fury and countercharged. Ayla extended her hand, crashing into the four of them with a wave of concussive force. Not a one buckled, and from among the four, the sister bearing the flamethrower seemed to suddenly glow.
Oh, that's bad.
Bound by a bright, pitiless light. The Jedi cursed under her breath, throwing another pillar of force out, but this time down into the ground at her own feet, pitching herself back just ahead of the suddenly living flames which poured out of the woman's weapon. The fire pursued her in the shape of angels.
So it's as said, so Fan has said this. It's to make the story interesting. He tries to keep it on track as possible. I highly recommend you go check out his videos. Can we put Fan's link in the chat, please, mods, if there's a mod here. The story, we want a good story. That's the whole purpose. Yeah, there are some parts where it's like, yeah, they might have a little extra leeway, but the story is what makes it exciting and interesting. It makes you want to come back for more. So that's okay. Like, you can only do so much when you're mixing two very big, bad sci-fi universes. So, you know, just to make it clear, I see the comments pop up every once in a while, but letting you know it's for fun. We have fun here.
Angels and twin-headed eagles which writhed and rolled as they came on, seeking to catch her inside the pursuing heat before she managed to outdistance its range. She withdrew her mind from the force around herself, sealing herself off preemptively before the psychic sense of the being behind the flame could reach out and touch her. Already this, or things like it, had begun to happen all across the field, turning sure victories into quagmires or outright defeats. But where Ayla had been able to break the minds of the flagging Imperial Psychers before, merely by use of their own fear of the Force, the same techniques were proving less than useless against these Sisters of Battle. For one thing, they were not Force sensitives themselves, but rather conduits to something or someone that was. Her thoughts were briefly called back to the ritual mind slavery and corrupt dark side siphoning that the Sith often used in the past to strengthen the power of a single individual. She had received limited training after becoming a Jedi Master in the recognition and disruption of such abilities. But here, her training and disruptive techniques were proving less than useless. For though the power she beheld in the sisters seemed related, in a mechanical sense, to those ancient Sith techniques, they were fundamentally different in one major way. The Sith used such powers to take from the weak and give to the strong, to join the power of many powerless persons in order for their strength to be consumed by the will of another greater master. This was clearly the reverse. An unfathomably powerful Force wielder was joining their mind and strength to those of the Imperial faith.
Yeah.
A power and technique Ayla had never even conceived of. She had come in contact with the presence within that power twice now, and had been forced to flash burn her mind each time in order to continue fighting. As such, the Jedi Master knew very little about it, aside from that just the memory of it was enough to all but crush her under its psychic weight.
When the Emperor's so cool.
Much as the other foul, force-wielding Imperial had before. Against these powers, Ayla had little recourse but to flee. Luckily, she was not on this battlefield alone, as the sisters discovered when they made to pursue her retreating form. A cascade of mortar fire flew over her head even as she threw herself back, the explosives colliding with the group of Imperials in a destructive pinpoint barrage. The metal beneath the armored feet of the sisters split and melted, breaking into pieces and forcing them down. Chunks of their ceramic armor flying free as the first cascade of clone munitions was followed by a second rain of death immediately after. Clawing the ground, kicking the broken earth and making headway, the three melee-armed Imperials charged ahead in spite of the shells. Making a beeline for the Jedi, who had rebounded back in their direction after the second explosive volley, getting between the fanatics and the firing lines of her clone troopers. The mortars ceased their discharge as the general came close to the action again. But just as the clones dared not fire their weapons so close to their general's line of attack, so too was the flamethrower-wielding warrior choked by the sudden proximity of the other sisters to the Jedi. And both sides could only watch what happened next. Against Ayla's precognitive strikes, the melee sisters wilted. The Jedi playing their frenzy against them as she stepped with azure grace and wove herself between them and their furious strikes. The halo of light around the flamethrower bearer had died away by the time she was done with the first three, and Ayla led the fight towards the remaining sisters without losing a step. These four were at the tail end of a vast, retreating line of Imperial forces, who were suddenly and violently shoved back into an outright rout by the arrival of the Jedi General and the main column of her clone forces. They had advanced so far that the shining gold and skull-adorned gates of the Imperial Temple were now clearly in sight. Even so, Ayla knew she had to maintain an ironclad discipline over her pursuit, allowing the Imperials to create their openings and riding the flow of the battle into each presented vulnerability, always balancing on a knife's edge. Though unaided by the Force, each of the Imperials was easily a match for any Mandalorian warrior when it came to the tenacity
This
and
model is
focused
like
fury of their
castle
attacks.
gothic themed.
The flamethrower-bearing sister discharged her weapon the instant her sisters fell, and the Jedi responded by throwing her lightsaber directly into the onrushing gout of painful death, and cutting the cone of fire which extended itself out from Ayla into two halves, riding up the stream of flame before meeting the nozzle of the weapon and cutting it clean in half. The strike left a jagged, molten line of damage across the breadth of the thick, fiery weapon, its fuel spilling and burning for a couple of stilted seconds. The saber arched back through the air, landing in Ayla's palm a millisecond before the sister and her inhuman weapon combusted. The Jedi slumped her shoulders, breathing hard and raising an aching hand to wipe grimy sweat from her head. This was the most intense fighting she had ever been a part of, and already the Jedi Master could feel herself being stretched beyond her competency. Forced to reach levels of martial prowess the Confederacy had simply never forced out of her. But, she reflected, at least they were winning. Or so she believed. That belief was contested, and even shattered as the buildings to either side of the avenue her army was marching down suddenly lit up with weapons fire. A wide ambush was suddenly sprung, and the retreating fanatics they'd been chasing wheeled about, revealing their retreat to be a lethal feint. Like the two crushing pincers of a sand strike, the Imperials who had taken up positions in the flanking buildings had remained hidden and inactive, allowing the Republic to overextend its advance. Once they had, these new Imperial fighters hammered into the flanks of the clone column while the sisters began to countercharge, clearly intending to ram into the front of their now assailed force with renewed vigor. Ayla had to think quickly if she wanted to rescue the front end of her column, reaching for her comm and beginning to relay orders, dodging and backtracking all the while. Aquila squad, go to the right flank with the detachment of whatever you need. Take those attack positions while I handle the ones on the left, she commanded, looking around, eyes widening as she scanned her surroundings until she spotted what she was looking for, and took off at a run. dodging shots from either side, spinning forward in the air in a cascading, rolling vault as the battle built up even more friction, the two armies colliding like storm fronts. All the while, bolts and lances of weaponized light and plasma sped past her, warming the moist after-storm air as she threw herself high into the sky. Her leap arced up unnaturally, bolstered with a powerful exhalation of the force. She flew up into the empty air, her momentum letting her hang for a few moments as the path of her fall was intercepted at the halfway point by the strafing runs of an attacking wing of LAAT gunships. Seizing the rim of one of the crew hatches, she hauled herself up inside a roughed-up team of clone troopers turning to face her with hidden, bewildered expressions. "Spin us around! We've got to move now if we want to save the left flank! Take us in towards the Sakul Transit Center, now!"
That was impressive.
She ordered, gesturing towards one of the occupied buildings. "Yes, General!" the commanding clone said with a salute before contacting the pilots and informing them of their new objective. However, no sooner had the message been relayed than a sudden, jarring thump shook the gunship. A moment later, the vessel soaring directly to the right banked suddenly and dove into the street below, slamming down amidst the fighting forces, its fiery body tumbling and twisting in an ocean of bodies. Ayla did not ignore this, looking out at the other ships in their formation and gasping at what she saw happening there. The armored Imperial fanatics had launched themselves from the battle below on jetpacks, and, upon reaching the right altitude, had done much as she herself had. Across most of their fellow gunships were adhered Sisters of the Imperial Faith, armed with blazing blue power swords or fat one-handed guns clenched in each fist. Their boots seemed magnetized and half stood on the hulls of the LAATs, firing their weapons into the ships they stood on or tearing into the metal beneath them with their wicked melee weapons. Right away, Ayla realized what this could mean and stuck her head out of the cabin of the gunship, looking back. Sure enough, hers had also been caught by the flying zealots, and two sisters clung to the vessel. The first of them stood on the main body of the ship, her sword glowing bright blue and wreathed in lightning. The sister stalked forward, walking on the side of the ship thanks to the magnetic locks on her boots. But she was not the most immediately threatening. The other sister had landed on the right-hand wing, and Ayla watched helplessly as the clone within the wing turret was blasted by the two guns of the fanatic. The explosive bullets turning him into a mess of organs, torn flesh, and shattered
Rip.
armor.
Sorry, my dude.
The crazed Imperial clearly had no intention of stopping with just him, however, letting the two automatic weapons begin strafing up the length of the wing. She was stopped just short of shearing it off the gunship when Ayla's thrown lightsaber spun past the Imperial, taking her arms off with it.
Oh.
Hand extended, Ayla called back her lightsaber, struggling to keep track of the blue blade in order to pull it back into the speeding, shaking ship. The distraction was so great it nearly killed her, the Jedi's life narrowly avoiding its end as the clone captain behind her grabbed her roughly by the back of her vest and yanked her further into the ship. The jarring move pulled her inside and threw her onto her back, just out of reach of the first sister's blade. The woman having reached the lip of the hatch near Ayla and nearly beheading her shortly after. Ayla closed her eyes, keeping a hold on her saber, now twice as hard without a visual line of sight on it. But she and her Kyber crystal were strongly tied together, especially after all that had happened to both of them in this battle, and she managed it, though, again, it took all her focus, drawing the blade closer and closer to the flying hull of the LAAT.
You gonna decapitate
In
her?
that time, the sister pulled herself into the ship cabin, magnetized boots adhering her to the ceiling in place of the ground. It made little difference. The clones raised their weapons, shouting half-spoken war cries, using maximum blaster settings and stun settings.
Neither had the desired effects, failing to even slow the sister down as she wove her blade through them, silencing the clones seconds before turning to the Jedi who yet remained.
Gosh.
She charged the short distance over to the ceiling of the gunship's cabin and leapt, deactivating her magnetized boots in order to land on the ground and, if possible, atop the prone alien woman. Ayla spoiled this plan by rolling to the side, throwing herself out of the gunship. For a few heartrending instances, the Jedi Master was free of all bonds, twirling in the air, her mind only half residing in her body. Her saber came flying out of that space like a rocket propelled on a bright blue engine, and her waiting hand seized it, scything her to the side thanks to its momentum, allowing her to reach out. She took hold of the back end of the LAAT and adhered herself there with the force. The sweat coating every inch of her was wicked off in the screaming wind, Leku flailing in the harsh, cold air. The ship wobbled and bounced beneath her,
Sorry, I have
still
to
afloat.
appreciate, look how curvy she is. She got that wide stance, though. She got a wide stance. And I am making a book nook here. It's made out of wood, and it's a little book nook. Kind of fun.
In spite of the damage it had taken earlier. For a moment, Ayla expected the sister to destroy the ship from within it, and thought she would be unaware of the Jedi's successful escape. But she was wrong on both counts. Leaping out of the cabin and catching herself on twin wings of fire, the sister twirled up and landed ahead of Ayla on the roof of the gunship, touching down while facing the Jedi. The blue alien watched the boots of her foe magnetize, electrical currents visible as they bound the powered armor to the hull of the gunship, and was grudgingly impressed as the sister stalked forward, her footwork hardly impaired by it. Ayla could only hope that she proved to be just as impressive. There was a brief moment of bizarre tranquility amidst the chaos as both warriors took the measure of the other. The wind howled, the battle raged like a sea of violence around and beneath them. Yet, in that moment, none of it existed, as the two warriors focused down on each other and then, moving in unison, charged. Saber plasma kissed sword blade as the two masters collided, rolling and striding across the back of the wavering LAAT like performers on a familiar stage. Ayla rolled her body about the narrow space, using her metaphysical bond to its hull to her full advantage, altering her inertia and the push of gravity to keep her returning to the ship even as she leapt and slid across it.
Well, that's
without
kinda
the
neat.
force, the Imperial was left without any such options for maneuvering, and was made to keep at least 1 foot upon the ground at any given time to keep from being swept away. And yet, in spite of this impairment, she met Ayla blow for blow and strike for strike. The sheer shock of it was almost enough to drive the Jedi Master out of her flow, unable to understand how this mere human woman was managing to keep up with, much less challenge her. And
Magic.
challenge her she did. The woman was a hammer, a furious combatant who never let up and never staggered. It was as though this Imperial had spent vast stretches of her career fighting and killing foes who were both far more mobile than she was and presumably just as deadly. It was as though this Imperial had spent vast stretches of her career fighting and killing foes who were both far more mobile than she was, and presumably just as deadly as the burning touch of any lightsaber blade. Ayla
Yes.
found her offenses repelled and countered, and then, after having spent her momentum, was quickly driven into the defensive. Raising her blade in desperate delay of death, Ayla felt the advantage leaving her side. What was this strength? What was this
It's not
power that
strength,
allowed
it's
this armed
faith.
but mundane woman to defy her, where others touched by the Force had not been able to? But defiant though she was, Ayla knew the answers already and simply did not want to face them. She and the Order had been arrogant. They had come into this battle wearing robes, armed with swords and little else, and to keep up the fight like this enemy was demanding much more of her than she could bring to the fore and maintain. Exhausted down to her bones, she was seconds away from an act of desperation when the need for it was removed, and the situation she was mired within deepened in its severity. The gunship had finally reached the building on their flank, flying over the roofs and walkways the Imperials occupied, raining death down into the body of the clone advance and soon up at the gunship. It was not long before the Jedi and Sister of Battle, currently locked in a vicious struggle, were forced apart by a sudden and wild bucking as the ship underneath them was pelted with munitions. The LAAT maintained its altitude for only seconds more before the damaged wing it had been limping on gave out completely, and the ship began to freefall out of the air. The Sister took off in a spiral of flame and smoke, leaving Master Ayla to her fate, a fate she fought against, running down the length of the falling ship at a full sprint. Without hesitation, she threw herself from the nose of the LAAT, spinning into the open air, arms tight against her chest as she pulled her momentum in. Around her, other gunships flew past, depositing their troops via ascension cables onto the contested roofs and access points. Many burning and bursting apart, naked before the vindictive return fire of the Imperial forces. Beneath the dervishing spin of the Jedi's body, the Imperial counterattack was sinking its fangs deep into the head of the Republic force, tearing away chunks in fiery, concussive displays of fanatical aggression. All of this flowed into her overburdened mind, and all of it needed to be pushed back and away as she extended her hand, just barely catching the piped lip of one of the buildings she had come to take back.
That's gonna hurt.
The Jedi Master groaned, dazed, hanging for a few moments. What remained of the sweat and rain dripping off her as she clung, pipe clutched in one hand, inactive saber squeezed in the other. Calling upon the Force, she hefted herself up over the lip and was met with immediate attack. The Imperials she faced now were, again, a new variant she had not encountered before. Covered head to toe in metal and rubber hazmat suits, their faces hidden behind blocky, rectangular screens. These new human beasts silently attacked, voicing no words or cries in odd contrast to their kin. Though they came on with the same determined assault as the Imperials who had come before them. A man attempted to lance and shoot her point blank with one of their directed energy weapons, having already been standing feet from her when she hauled herself up. She sliced off the front of his gun and bisected him in the following instant.
I'm not sure who it is.
But no sooner had his torso fallen away than that she was now facing a volley of light-speed beams of deadly light. Ayla ducked, already moving before the shots had been fired, precognition barely keeping her a hair's breadth away from death. Thrusting her hand out and sending the dying soldier's fallen torso and standing legs hurtling through the air and into the dense
it's fans OC guard. Okay, my brain was just like, it's been a while since we talked about them. So I was like, huh?
Clusters of attackers now facing her. This was not enough to avoid them shooting at all, however, and she was forced to keep moving, zipping, skating across the surface of the steel roof as the Jedi carefully danced about, continuously tangling the aiming soldiers in various crossfire positions, while throwing and pushing them with increasingly violent and unrestrained exhalations of the Force. Still, she would not have lasted more than a couple of seconds were it not for the clones who were fast coming to her aid, creating chaos as the enemy found their attentions divided between the alien menace and her army of clones.
Even so, the fighting was desperate, and while the Imperials were gradually driven back, they made the clones bleed for every centimeter of metal they were forced to surrender. These cursed soldiers carried an aura about them as black as night, and they were silent, always silent, even as they were cut down, or did the cutting down. While they were armed with the standard Imperial fare, they also had terrible weapons among them, weapons which spat gouts of what appeared to be superheated stone. Ayla had watched as, time and again, these deathly, silent soldiers had charged near certain death, a few reaching the line of the firing clones and dousing them in the horrifying, burning excretions produced by the weapon. She had heard the dying, desperate screams of the soon immobilized clones who were the victims of these guns, who did not pass easily or quickly as the substance rapidly cooled and hardened around them, becoming moaning, crying blocks of cover for the advance of the Imperial soldiers. And yet, the true horror of her situation was not made obvious to her until after the clones had driven back the roof-bound Imperials, now able to begin the arduous process of securing the building they stood on, and therefore their flanks. She had stumbled to the nearby railings overlooking the battle, breathing heavily, feeling her body thrum with sore pain and growing exhaustion, and trying to rally. Instead, the sight there sucked her heaving breaths out of her lungs. The front lines had become a shamble, a disorganized melee which her determined forces were swiftly losing. They needed heavy armored support, and they needed it right away. Ayla's eyes scanned the column line, and saw that much of her heavy support was held up in the mire of advancing troops. They were being ground to dust at that choke point. She reached for her communicator and activated it. "Commanders of the main column, this is General Sakura. You need to move all your infantry forces off the main street. If you are near to the besieged flanks, then breach the base of those buildings and begin fighting your way in. Otherwise, use side roads, street alleys, and bordering buildings. Armor commanders, I need everything heavy to the front. And I need them here 5 minutes ago. Prioritize the Juggernaut reserve units. Smash the enemy front and then deploy troopers to hold our gains. Hammer and hold again and again. We can win this if we hold to the plan," she sent to them. "Yes, General," came the unified responses from the commanders. She nodded as if to reassure herself and took a step before stumbling. Ayla fell to one knee, heart beating out of control in her chest. What was happening? The sounds of the battle around her were loud, smothering, booming, and yet another sound was rising in the background, slowly devouring the noise coming from everything else. A clone came to her side, one of the recently deposited from the newly arriving gunships. He took her arm, attempted to help her up, but she found the strength in her legs failing, faltering under her own weight as the power she had drawn into her beleaguered body was drawn from her like blood spilling out from a punctured throat. And the sound just grew louder and louder. And where before it had been indistinct, now she could make it out all too clearly. The sound of 1 billion voices, all crying out in despair, in pain, in sudden immutable terror. And then Ayla sagged. "General? General, are you all right? Are you injured? Medic! Medic!" The clone was calling by her side. I am fine," she lied, finding at last the strength to stand and rising. "General, what happened?" the clone asked. She shook her head, lines drawn across her face as she attempted to absorb and understand the sensations which had just run through her, through every Jedi on the planet. "It was a disturbance. A great disturbance in the Force.
In the Force, yeah.
It was as if countless voices cried out for aid, for help, and were suddenly silent."
She said the thing.
She said. The clone tilted his head.
Oh.
"What does it mean, General?"
The
he
bomb
asked.
has been dropped.
She did not answer
I just
him
looked
for
at the
a few
picture.
moments, looking down at her hands, flexing her fingers, and then up at the sky. The clearing blue above rapidly finding itself choked and blocked anew by bars of black smoke. It means things are moving around us, even while we are trapped here. It means we need to bring this fight to a close, sooner rather than later, she said. The trooper nodded,
okay.
and together they began to march towards the other waiting troops. And then the Jedi staggered again, and then, before she could even react, was struck a third time. But not by anything physical. The Master found herself on hands and knees, her soul sounding, resonating painfully in the wake of what she had just sensed. She saw her vision blurring for a moment, recovering
Good
more
old
slowly this time.
Exterminatus.
The medic did come, but there was little he could do to treat her, for even as Ayla recovered physically from the shock, mentally and spiritually, she remained decimated. How many echoes had she just felt? How many resounding cries followed by this horrid, freezing silence? Ayla and all the Jedi upon the planet were suddenly forced to harden themselves, or succumb in maddening despair to the truth the Force had revealed to them. A proclamation echoed in the voices of uncountable billions. What they had sensed was not the final shriek of a murdered planet. It was the death cry of several worlds. The mailed fist of distant Davik Thun was tightening around the Confederacy of Independent Systems.
I was gonna say it's the Confederates. They're that's rough, buddy.
And as its bones began to snap, the Jedi bore terrible, distant witness to the end of the Clone Wars.
Yikes. That's not a good time.
I'm sorry. I let it overcome me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you
Deppa
better be.
groaned, cradled in Windu's
You
good
killed a
arm.
guy. Not even the right
I
one.
understand. Please, don't speak. Save your strength. Windu implored her, maintaining his strong face. But, in truth, he was
pissed.
breaking inside. The battle was over. Victory was theirs, and yet this was what they had to show for it. Jedi Master Deppa Billaba lay before him, her legs torn apart at the knees, nearly every bone in her body broken or fractured. The sound of her voice was hard for him to hear, but her rattling laughter and subsequent coughs and breathing were even more terrible. I cannot survive this. I'm sorry, Master Windu. You will have to continue the fight without me, she rasped. The wounded Jedi smiled at him as much as she could, red dribbling from her crooked lips, her blood-filled eyes looking into his. Windu felt his face tense.
Are you gonna bring up her apprentice?
Do not mourn me, she said softly. Rejoice. Windu nodded, recognizing this teaching of his order. I will. It has been an honor to know you in life, Master Deppa Billaba. I will honor you and rejoice at your unity with the Force, said Mace, finding his resolve once more. She closed her eyes, and he could feel her slipping away. It took everything in him to retain his dignity then, as he held her, his friend fading from life in his arms. Her smile dissolved, and her bloodied eyes did not open again. Mace, she whispered, barely able to force the breaths up and out of her broken body. "Yes," he said, leaning in to listen.
Caleb.
She breathed. Her spirit halfway departed and spoke with a final, shuddering whisper. "Don't tell Caleb."
Aha, knew it.
And with the exhalation of those last words, she did not breathe in again and passed. He held her body for a time longer.
Don't tell him
before
that you fell to the
gently
dark
laying her
side,
down
lady.
And standing, looking at her broken form. Was this what victory would look like from now on? Was this the face of the future? The bloody face of his friends and masters passed from life and into the Force? His simmering thoughts were drawn back and away from his ruminations when he heard the familiar voice of Master Obi-Wan Kenobi call for him. "Master Windu, you are needed!" Sighing through his nose, he gathered himself, and then, once sufficiently strong, turned and jogged over to where he, Jocasta Nu, and Stas Ali had gathered, which was around the wounded body of Jedi Master Jaro Tapal. Master Obi-Wan met him just before he arrived, Mace slowing to consult with him. "How is he?" whispered the senior master. "Not good," Obi-Wan admitted. "Stas is doing what she can, but even she is being stretched thin at this point, and his wound is severe." He continued. Mace nodded gravely. "Last words may be in order," Kenobi added in a more softly spoken whisper. Master Windu paused and gave one more curt nod, and then turned to face the shuddering, ailing form of Jedi Master Tapal. He came to his side, kneeling and taking the large Jedi's hand when it was offered, clasping it tightly. Master Jocasta stood back behind them, straight as a rod, and watching on.
Okay, so
while
maybe she didn't
Stas
kill
was
him
kneeled
yet,
over
but he's
Tapal,
not doing hot.
bloody hands pressing to either side of the hole in his chest as she attempted to heal him. "Master Tapal," said Mace Windu.
"Ah, Master Windu.
"One moment, if you will," he said, pushing away Stas Ali with the burnt, blunt stump of his other hand.
That's enough, Ali. Save your strength for those that can benefit,"
he said gruffly, pain constrained in every word. "But I can," she started to say, but he shook his head.
"I am done, Master Ali. Say what you will about Master Dappa Balaba. She was never found wanting with a saber strike.
Yep.
Go,"
he said to her. Stas's face tensed, but she nodded and stood up, bowing and then turning away, unable or unwilling to watch.
How is she?"
Dead.
Master Tapal asked after Master Ali had departed. "Stas?" asked Windu.
"No, I mean, Balaba."
Dead.
The Lasat master clarified. Windu's face threatened to grimace, but he kept himself as placid as possible. "She has passed. Master Dappa Balaba has become one with the Force," he said. Tapal did not hide his own grimace.
"Ah, damn. She would have been an asset in the war that is coming."
He growled through obvious pain, his eyes milky white.
"I can see it, Windu, as I lie here, so close to the end. I see so much. We were arrogant. Fought them like droids. Like separatists.
The master began to say. Windu watched on in stunned silence, clutching his friend's hand as his death delirium began to take him. Then he was pulled close, T'Pol's large arm hauling him near the hole in his chest, the Lasat speaking into Mace's ear.
Listen to me. I can see it all so clearly now. The invaders, the Imperials,
He
and
dies.
the chaos that follows.
Oh,
It will swallow us whole if we do not discard our pride. It may have devoured us already. This war in the shadows.
Windu tried to pull back, but was held fast by a strength the Lasat should not have been able to muster in his wounded state. What are you talking about, Master T'Pol? Mace asked stiffly. The dying master's head flopped to one side, and then the other, and his grip wavered, but then strengthened again.
It is a war we have not known, but one we have been fighting all along. But there is a new war coming. It's already here. In fact, a true war to devour the secret war. We are at risk, Master Windu, of being consumed.
The dying master.
is he talking about chaos, or are we talking about Tyranids now? Because now I'm... That's bad. I was like, wait a second, secret war. War in the
Master raved. I know, my friend, I know. I will safeguard the Jedi Order and the Republic. I promise, said Windu.
But, Master Windu, what if one must be chosen over the other?
The alien master said, weakening again. I will not let the Empire devour either. Mace assured. The dying master did something unexpected then, and grinned a red grin.
I was not speaking of the Empire.
He's got a lot of words to say.
He said, but did not elaborate, releasing his grip on the master and laying back more. Windu was sure this would be the last time he heard the Lasat master, but T'Pol did manage to speak one more time.
Dude, he cannot stop. Dang.
Kestis. My Padawan.
The Lasat croaked. I will look after him. I'll make sure of it. Windu promised him.
Prepare him. Windu. Prepare him. He's not
He keeps...
ready.
His words, he just keeps going, man.
We are not ready.
Windu held the Master's hand as he slipped away, and remained for a time after. The other Jedi, those who could still fight, had gathered together now, standing in a loose circle around Windu and the fallen Jedi he mourned.
We are ready to move towards the bridge,
said Master Jocasta Nu, rifle still held in her hands. No, we are not. Recover as many of our forces as we can. We're pulling out of this ship, said Master Windu, his voice running over with spite.
Was it not the plan to take the ship?
Asked the elderly librarian. The plan has shifted. Too much Jedi blood has been spilled. Too many of us have fallen to accomplish too little. The ship is crippled. What we have done is enough. Take our wounded and our dead and pull them back to the boarding pods. We are done here. Jocasta nodded, and Obi-Wan voiced no complaint. For all they knew, there was another monster like this waiting for them at the captain's chair, and they could not continue to contend with this nature of warrior, not the way they are now. The thoughts drew Mace Windu's eyes back towards the slumped corpse of the Space Marine they had vanquished. Still kneeling, held up by his powered armor, the man had died smirking at them. Jocasta, assemble some of the able-bodied Jedi as well. We are taking this thing with us.
Oh.
We need to better understand our enemy. We need to adapt to what they are, he said, and the old woman nodded in stiff agreement. Javona was pushed into the wide, steel-barred room with the rest of the aliens. She had been found in the latest purge raids, and after a thorough interrogation, one which left her without 3 of her fingers, and covered in bruises, they had thrown her into a confinement cell, and let her sit without food, water, or medical aid for what she could only guess was hours or days. She had been so careful until now. She had managed to stay hidden for so long. But one mistake, one bad encounter, one report on her appearance, and they had come for her. If they had not been so sure she was part of a cell or group of her kind, then they likely would have killed her right there and then. And, of course, she was. But she'd choose 1,000,000 deaths before betraying her family or her kind to the death-worshipping fanatics who had taken her. Javona had shivered as she contemplated such thoughts, for she knew that they may well attempt to force her through that very trial, if they could do so without her expiring. There were so few like her left now, after all the purges and the searches and the Space Marines. She had barely avoided them. Her skin color and facial features had always helped her pass for human much more easily than the rest of her family. An unrequested blessing she'd found herself relying on for her very survival. With that thought present in her mind, she unwove the loose turban she wore over her head, making her alien features more obvious to the others around her, putting them and herself more at ease, since she was still dressed in the Imperial fatigues she had stolen for her disguise. The dirty, frightened faces around her, emaciated and discolored, softened right away with the revelation. In this horrible place, even being able to recognize your species was irrelevant. It was enough to not be human, or at least not Imperial human. Their hatred, their persecution, effectively made all who found themselves here of the same race. The door behind Javona slammed shut, making her jump and submerging her in darkness. The creaking of locks and seals activating and sliding into place sounded from where the door had been in the blinding darkness, and Javona was left blinking in shadows for almost 5 minutes before her eyes adjusted enough to allow her to see anything. The whole place was crowded, and it stank. Like her previous holding cell, there were no toilets, much less bathrooms, though the floor was coated in loose, dusty sand and plenty of worthless, discarded junk. While they were not pressed shoulder to shoulder, there was clearly not enough space for all of them to lie down, even if any of them wanted to make contact with the filthy floor. She walked, running her hands along the metal bracings of the oddly mechanical textured walls. So complicated. She wondered if this room had been repurposed into a general holding cell, and if so, what had it been before? She reached an odd detail then, a bulky, fist-sized nodule of metal, roughly round in shape and protruding 3 inches from the surface of the wall. She felt it out with her fingers, squinting at it. It had some sort of a hole near the top, and it almost looked like some kind of reinforced metal nozzle. A metal nozzle on a wall. She squinted a little harder and looked down the length of it, noticing the vague lumps proceeding further and further down.
Well, this is bad. I have a guess. I can't say the guess. I don't think I can say the guess on YouTube. This is not fine. This is definitely not fine.
At regular intervals, the same pattern repeating above her head as well.
Not above the head.
And rows of nozzles?
No!
Then, a sudden sharp fear plunged
no.
into her gut, a freezing blade of revelation. She kneeled down, pinching some of the sand between her fingers and dabbing the digits against her tongue.
The ash?
Not sand.
Ash.
Ashes.
Yeah.
She reached down further and grabbed one of the discarded items. Not an item, but a charred bone wreathed in burnt fiber. Terror thrilled within her as she stood up and looked around once more. This was not a holding cell. This was a death chamber. She ran as quickly as she could, reaching the door and yanking on it, fingers closing around the steel texture and rivets. It did not budge in the slightest, but it did blast her with a near lethal amount of electrical volts, sending her careening back against the crowd behind her. Smoking, twitching, the reason none of the others were attempting to assault their way out the door seemed clear enough. Again, she had no concept of how long it took her to recover and stand up, but the time was given over to her as she found herself still alive by then. She waited. They all waited, and waited, and waited. She would have thought they would get it over with quickly. Didn't the damned corpse worshippers have other people to burn to death today? But the sadistic captors seemed content to force them all to wait for their execution within the uncomfortable, cramped space. Soon, she began to wonder if they would all suffocate here, first from breathing each other's air, before finally there was the sound of a metallic thumping and clinking. She felt her bladder nearly go entirely weak at that moment, but held strong for long enough to realize it was the door in front of her making the noise, and not the walls around her. They were going to add someone else to the room. Javona decided in that moment that she would rush the door,
Bad
regardless of the consequences. What was the worst they could do?
I mean,
Kill
yeah.
her? At least she would not be left waiting for death in this vile, stinking darkness. She braced herself for a run, crouching slightly. And when the light came through, blinding her temporarily, she ran at full speed,
troops that are
screaming as she charged into certain death, or at least severe pain. To her surprise, her body connected with one of the armored guards, and she, as well as the Imperial, went tumbling back and against the wall. They began to struggle then, Javona punching him twice and hurting her fists on his armor as she rolled on top of him. Eyes closed, she clung to the front of his vest, in no way a fighter, at least not before now. She expected to feel the hard smacking of an elbow or rifle butt into the side of her head, But instead, she felt the light knocking of metal knuckles rapping against her head crest. She opened her eyes then, and gasped. Hey, I'm guessing you don't like it in there very much. Would you like to, I don't know, get out of here? Asked the clearly non-Imperial soldier who lay beneath her,
Bruh.
speaking the local language of the planet she had found herself on. A veritable waterfall of emotions fell through Javona at that point, tears which were already on her face intensifying, heart thumping as hope and disbelief conjoined there. You are the Republic? She managed to ask through clumsy galactic basic. Well, close enough. My name's Combeer, and yours?
I wonder if the Imperium is going to use this to find the rest of the cell. Oh, that would be so like them and so incredibly brutal.
He asked. Javona, she said, blinking tears rapidly out of her eyes. Nice to meet you, Javona. So, I hate to make any demands, especially of someone as, pretty as you, but, I've got to get up and help my people finish the rescue. He said,
the
still
Riz King
pinned beneath her. Javona blushed and nodded hastily, climbing back and off of him, as well as rising to her feet. It was then that she noticed that they were not alone. Other men like Combeer, though dressed in an assortment of armor, were helping escort the other prisoners out of the cells. He rose, and after a while was leading the escort that was taking them away, Javona not far behind. The corridors were scorched with weapons fire, and every couple of steps or turns, they would be forced to step over or trample
the guys
a fallen
in the series,
Imperial
they do
soldier.
have Riz, I agree.
You and these fight through the Imperium? She asked him as they went. He nodded, not looking back, still seeming wary, clearly not sure they had gotten them all on the way in. Yeah, though it wasn't as hard as you think. There were barely any of them left in the camp when we arrived. Come on, this way, to the courtyards, he said, taking her hand and leading her further into the prison. Courtyards are in center of camp, no way out there, she said, and though she could not see it, Combeer grinned inside his helmet.
I 100% just broke that.
You'll see, he assured her.
Transports.
And sure enough, when he opened the hatch out into the barren courtyard, her breath was taken away. Parked across the entire space, and floating, hovering on repulsor lifts above them, was a fleet of ships. All civilian, space-worthy craft, most of which came equipped with blaster cannons, turrets, and other standard defenses. And, from the burning peeled remnants of the defense turrets and watchtowers which ringed the prison camp, it was clear that they had been used, and to great effect. Combeer paused to wave everyone through and make sure no one had been left behind, ushering out prisoners into waiting ships and helping those ships take off and new ships to land.
I'll try to
when
control
the
my
capacity
strength,
had
don't
been
worry.
filled up. Javona knew that she could leave at any time from that moment, get onto any of the waiting ships that stood by. But, instead, she chose to stay near Combeer, waiting for him to conclude.
The Riz King! She's like, I want to stay next to you, sir. You saved me. How nice. So goofy.
What he was doing, intent on being on his ship by the end. She did not have to wait too long, for Combeer and the others had cleared most of the prison, only thinking to check the actual execution chambers near the end of their search for survivors. His ship was no starfighter, but not as large as some of the others that had landed. Luckily for her, as far as she was concerned, Combeer had no other survivors waiting on space, and so no other prisoners joined them as she followed him up the ramp to his ship. Hey Mom, we got one passenger coming aboard, he said as they stepped inside. Who? A survivor? She asked, twisting around to look at Javona. Combeer nodded and gestured back towards her. Meet Javona, he said. Javona waved, feeling uncharacteristically shy under the woman's sudden scrutiny, which ultimately settled over her alien features approvingly. Javona waved, feeling uncharacteristically shy under the woman's sudden scrutiny, which ultimately settled over her alien features approvingly.
Wait.
It was a novel sensation,
Oh,
for
it
before
did.
now, only
I thought it
her
repeated
own
for a second.
family had ever looked kindly on the small purple ridge which crowned the center of her upper brows, or the bald, smooth expanse of her hairless head. The only two atypical features she bore.
Good. She can man the upper turret if we get into trouble. Now, strap yourself in. I'm taking us out of here.
Said Venora, turning back to her controls and beginning the takeoff sequence, engines whining and spinning up as the two others
Great,
took seats
she can
behind
fire
her
the
and
gun.
did as instructed.
Imperial spirit right there.
You are from Axum?
Javona asked Combeer, gripping the safety restraints on her chair lightly as the ship jerked and began to float up. Born and raised. What about you? He asked. She shook her head.
Newer arrivals, me and my family. We were already running from Imperium. It had been hoped that, with Axum being so big, we could escape. But it's been hard to go unnoticed.
Javona admitted. You were already running? Where do you come from? Asked Combeer. Javona pointed up towards the sky in response.
Was born on planet called Yevon Primiris. It was safe place for a time. Then come Skywatchers and Imperium. They take us all away, kill any who they notice are different, burn our planet.
Yeah. She looks a lot like a gene stealer. That's bad. I was like thinking about it. I was like, she's bald and has a ridge. She gives me gene stealer vibes.
And leave it with nothing. Normally is easy to hide, but with so many eyes on so few ships,
She said, sorrow lacing her voice.
That's monstrous. Why would they do that?
Combeer asked.
Honestly,
Because they fear my people and beliefs. They know Corpse God is lie, and that our gods are true. And so...
well, there it is there. Yeah. Well, there you go. As soon as she said corpse god. Yep, that's bad. Buddy, you should do yourself a favor and take her out.
they kill us to try to stop them coming to us.
She said, they fear your gods? Who or what are your gods? Are they real things or just a belief? Combeer asked, leaning in, interested.
They real. From between starfires they come, old and wise and true. Almost we saw them, and one was with us always. Saw him with my own eyes. They real.
She insisted. Suddenly, there was beeping in the control console, and Javona jerked her head forward, seeing a thick, cigar-shaped ship of immense size falling through the atmosphere, though fairly distantly from them.
Look alive, you two. We're getting an SOS from a large ship falling out of orbit. We may be needed for emergency help,
said Venora. Javona watched as Combeer turned and looked at the controls he had access to, typing away at them for a moment. This can't be right. Mom, that's a Confederate battlecruiser. What is it doing here? He said after a moment.
Let's see if we can find out. Patching them through now,
she said. Static filled the cockpit speakers, making Javona clap her hands to her ears, the devices buzzing and churning for a time as a distant-sounding voice slowly came into focus and replaced them.
This is Ahsoka Tano, acting commander of the 501st Clone Detachment. Repeat, this is Ahsoka Tano of the Galactic Republic. We're going down and need support. Repeat, we are going down and need help angling our approach for an emergency landing.
Oh, great.
Any Republic forces, please respond.
Javona had considerable trouble keeping up with the rapidly spoken Galactic Basic,
far more fluent in the Imperial tongue, but understood enough to know that their help was needed. She looked to her rescuers, wondering what they would do now. There was a pause then, as Combier's mother looked back at her son, and he to her. Combier nodded, and she nodded back.
I'll contact as many of the other ships as are willing to help. I'll put you through to that ship in a second,
said Venora, Combier taking a headset and removing his helmet, replacing it. Copy that, Ahsoka Tano. This is Combier and the Resistance Fighters of Axum. We may not be the Republic forces you're calling for, but I think we're close enough. Ships incoming to your location. Towing cables and tractor beams are prepped. If you have a particular landing location in mind, I suggest you send it to us now.
We are going back to fight?
Javona asked nervously, though neither of the two answered her, which was answer enough. And, if that had not made it clear, the following broadcast did.
Boy, am I glad to hear a friendly voice, forwarding our projected landing site. Fair warning, Resistance fighters, we are not done fighting, so we plan to park this wreck right on top of them. Understood?
Combier barely hesitated. Understood, Commander. Here's hoping they're grouped tight.
Well, this is bad. This is very bad. Gene stealers are not good. And she is definitely one. I thought it was like, at first I was like, oh, it's just an alien chick. The description I was like thinking about it, and I was like, kind of weird that they're not describing what she looks like. Whatever. It's some unnamed or like what, like homebrew Star Wars alien. No. No, it's bad. It's bad.
They've been chatting like that since they met. Crosshair grated. Yeah, and? Wrecker asked, walking alongside and just in front of the tall sniper.
It's unnatural, Crosshair hissed. Wrecker looked at him, and then forward to the two who were leading their group. They were not loud and did not seem to be slowing them down. The murmur of their voices had been near constant from the moment Tech and Quo 84 had begun speaking. Crosshair had used his comm to listen in on their gabbing, but found their conversation to be all but indecipherable. And not because the two were speaking in some other language, or using a dialect or jargon that was outside his understanding, at least for the most part. No, Crosshair could follow the words and meanings of their speech, but could not, for the life of him, locate a central theme or reasoning behind their conversation. The two appeared to be going back and forth, one delighting the other with seemingly random trivia, only barely related to the trivia that had preceded it.
So, I was made to somehow create a baseline M-wave receiver without even an iota of Temerite or to boost the signal.
Quo was saying.
An M-wave receiver without anything to conduct that kind of wavelength.
It seems to me that he was trying to cause you to fail, Tech replied. Quo nodded his head emphatically.
Indeed, I also suspect that was the case. But I foiled that plan by using the battery casing itself to bolster the signal. Granted, it only worked after you let it heat up for a few minutes before using, but it was done in the end.
The droid man said proudly.
Fascinating use of recombinant ideology.
I myself am quite the recombinator. We performed a delicate data extraction from Raxus Prime earlier in the war. Things did not turn out exactly as planned, stranding Crosshair and I inside a Viridium mine. The brainy clone explained.
Oh, Viridium! I haven't heard of that ore, but it sounds volatile.
The red-robed droid man interjected. Extremely. Any blaster fire inside the tunnel risked a full-scale Viridium meltdown. I almost had to yank Crosshair's rifle out of his hands to keep him from atomizing us out of habit. And that was not all. Viridium is also highly radio-absorbent, blocking out our comms and leaving us without any way to signal for help. However, I realized that with controlled detonations, I could cause a radioactive feedback loop along the seams of the mine. Tech said.
Hello, welcome in.
And cause a signal-bolstering radiation burst born on energetic ion waves.
Quo completed.
Precisely.
They're
Obviously,
like best
Crosshair and I
now.
were eating anti-radiation supplements for the next 2 months after. But it got the message across. Almost deafened Hunter, in fact.
Wrecker smirked as he marched behind them, only catching scratches of the rapidly moving topics.
I don't know. I think it's kinda cute. Tech finally made a friend who's as excited about useless stuff as he is,
said the larger clone, punctuating the words with a laugh.
You won't think it's so cute if they don't take us where we need to go.
Crosshair growled. Well, where else would they be taking us? Wrecker asked. The sniper shrugged, hidden face scowling.
On a tour of the fragging ship, for starters,
he grumbled. As if sensing the soft-spoken criticism, Quo turned back towards the two in the rear and indicated toward the door in the hallway not far from where they strode.
Fear not, friends. Our destination lies just ahead. It won't be long now,
he said. When they came close to the doors, it became obvious that they were far more reinforced than the majority of the other similar doors they had already come across. Quo approached without hesitation, extending out his tendrils and interfacing with the gate's mechanisms. And then, time began to tick by. First 1 minute, then 2, and then 3 minutes passed, with the clones only growing antsier and antsier as they were made to wait in the hallway, weapons out and swiveling.
How long is this going to take, Hunter? At this point, we might as well just serve ourselves up to the imps.
Crosshair hissed. Oh, don't worry about that. It's highly unlikely they will find us now. There really shouldn't be many people wandering the ship at this point, said Tech.
What? Why?
Crosshair followed up. Tech blinked, head tilting. Obviously because the warp breach alarm has been triggered. Most of the ship's inhabitants will be inside bunkers and warded shelters by now, if not preemptively cramming themselves inside of escape pods, Tech said. Crosshair scowled at that.
Obviously? What's so obvious about any of that? What is a warp breach, and why aren't we hiding from it? And how the frag would I know any of that?
Crosshair spat. Calm down, Crosshair.
Frag? Do they really use frag?
That you've been listening in on me and Quo. He is quite insightful, and explained all of that several minutes ago. Though I'm still not sure what a warp tear is exactly, I do understand that it has to do with their FTL drives, and that it's quite dangerous. But I don't think I have to explain why we can't go into the shelters with the Imperials right now. Tech was saying before a loud, mechanical squeal cut him off, drawing all of their attentions back to the door. Quo stepped back and away from it, the many locks creaking and cracking open as the bars around it slid back and away. Soon, the passage was clear and open before them. Tech began to move forward, but Hunter halted him with an extended hand. Hold on, Tech. I'll take point. Cover me, he said, eyes finding Crosshair's and giving the barest nod. Crosshair returned it and subtly angled his rifle to aim at Quo's back. Tech nodded and stood back, pistols drawn to cover Hunter, as the sergeant stalked inside, past the lip of the door, and looked around. A little time passed before Hunter radioed the others. I think you will all want to see this. Especially you, Tech, he said. Shrugging, the others filed in, Crosshair taking up the rear behind Quo as they entered into the room. The chamber was both massively large and densely packed with all manner of computers, devices, and instruments. And in the center of it all, half dismantled and clearly being studied, was the bomb itself.
Whoa! There it is. That's a big
Wrecker
bomb.
Gasped excitedly.
Wait, isn't that supposed to be back on a Naxos?
Crosshair asked. Hunter nodded. It is.
Maybe they made
If it's
another
here,
one.
Then what exactly is keeping a Naxos in line under Imperial control? The sergeant wondered aloud. The threat of the bomb appears to have been enough. As long as the people believe it's still there, then it might as well be. After all, most of the power behind a bomb this large isn't in its actual detonation, but in the threat of it. Or at least, so it would appear. The words gave Hunter a devious idea. Let's put that to the test then. Tech, Quo, can you two get this bomb operational again, quickly?
Oh gosh.
The two looked at each other and then at the bomb before nodding in unison.
It should not be a problem, though we will need the aid of a lifter servitor.
Quo 84
Heavy.
said.
No
got
need,
heavy.
Tech replied. We've got something, or rather, someone, better, he said with a smile. Wrecker stalked forward then, laughing as he put his gun away and clapped his large hands together. You bet you do. I'm way, way better at lifting than Trashy ever was, the huge clone said amiably. But, Hunter, why do we even want this thing operational? Wasn't our mission to disable it? Crosshair asked. Hunter turned and grinned. Exactly. And there isn't a bomb that's more disabled than one we've already set off. As far as I'm concerned, this ship is as good a place as any to set it off, he said.
Oh.
Doesn't anyone here think he might have an issue with that? Crosshair asked, indicating towards Quo. The others looked at him as well, and he paused and looked behind himself before realizing he was truly the subject of their scrutiny.
I have few friends on this ship, and those I do have do not plan to remain much longer. In fact, I fully intend to depart with them before this is done. We are not far from where I need to meet them. If I aid you in this, may I be released from your escort and, as Call would say, go our separate ways?
The machine man asked. Bad idea, said Crosshair. Hunter paused for a moment, rubbing his chin. Tech, check the work when it's all done. If it all looks right, then yeah, you can go. I don't really understand what kind of power struggle you are involved in, but if this war has taught me anything, it's that the enemy of my enemy, Hunter began to say,
is my friend. That is also one of Call's sayings. Or at least, one I've heard him repeat ad nauseum. For what it's worth, Sergeant, I agree,
said Quo. Then get to work, both of you. Crosshair and I will cover the entrance. Let me know when you are done. Sister Legatine Reyna Ordain spiraled down and away from the falling heretic gunship, her jump pack sputtering and spitting flames and thrust, but doing so in weakening bursts. The packs were not meant for true, sustained flight, and she had already tested hers to the limit during her bout with the alien witch. Controlling her own fall, she burned down towards the ground at speeds which would have pulped the flesh of a normal human, colliding with the metal avenue in a shower of shimmering fragments and fire. Her armor compensated for the impact with a loud mechanical hiss, and she stood from her landing crouch almost without pause, seeing that the armor of the clones she had landed on had not protected their frail bodies as her blessed plate had done for her. Sword held aloft, she cut through the smoke to strike the stunned survivors of the squad she had fallen upon. First one, and then the other. But as soon as she cut down those nearest her, the spire winds blew away the smoke around her, revealing a grouped mass of 40 clones. They held grenade and missile launchers, weapons they had trained on her from the moment she saw them.
Yo! Thank you, Redtail Wolf, for the bits. Thank you. It is looking good. It is making slow progress. Doing extra work to paint some of these other... There we go. Wait, that's better. I gotta glue that in. But it is slowly coming together. It's taking a little extra time, but that is okay. Can I get that to sit? There. It's getting there. It's getting there. This, I think, needs to get tucked behind here. I might use one of these. Anyways, thank you for the bits, man. No Awakened Pillar Man music. I actually have that set for the higher level redeems. But trust me, it's there. I put it in there. It's great. Sorry, we'll keep going.
She grit her teeth, her face tightening as her life once more met the razor's edge. Pivoting towards the group and raising her sword, they fired. Reyna knew that she did not have enough power left in her pack to fly away into safety, but knew also that it was not fully expended, not yet. Even now, the energy cells of her power suit's generator were helping to bolster the jump pack, which was mounted over it. But
Even so, it would take her precious seconds to emulate flight once more, seconds she simply did not have. So, instead, she charged, eyes tracking the missiles.
To answer your question, I have it set for Akasupas because Sad Bear asked. It's for 50 subs. And then it's for super chats or bits of 100 or more is what it's set for. That's it. I think I need to reposition this, but there you go, 'cause you asked.
And noting that they were joined by arching mortars as well. Munition salvos set to break her apart like an egg struck with firecrackers. But while her pack lacked the power to carry her far into the air, it did have enough strength stored up to launch her forward and to the left. An action she waited until the very last second to perform, throwing herself just out of the way of the streaking projectiles, which curved in an attempt to follow her, but too late. The missiles collided into the street behind her, and the sudden overlapping explosions which followed as a result of the raining mortars only seemed to help propel her forward.
I do like epic
and
version of
closer
Burley's.
to the clones. They fired again, and then a third time, each time finding their weapons just barely evaded by the last-second rocket sprints of the sister, which carried her into their number like a bullet flying into a body. The aftermath of the impact was bloody and lethal, with Reyna's voice ringing out in clear song as she lopped away limbs, bisected torsos, and divided faces and halves, turning living resistance into pacified.
No, the way bits work is that you take whatever the number is and you divide by 100. So, your example, 5,000 bits is $50. It's like that. Yeah. It's really confusing because it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're like trying to figure out what the actual numbers are. Yeah, so the way bits work is that when you buy bits, you do pay a little bit more. Here it is. Bro, Red Tail Wolf, you did not need to do that. Thank you so much, man. It is new. I only started it. Oh, where was it? I've had it in place for about like a month now, I think. Yeah. I was very happy with putting that together. Thank you, Red Tail Wolf. That's very sweet of you. What did you just walk into? Someone donated to me, and it sets off a little alert, a special alert because of the dollar amount. Fan hi. No, the way bits work is you pay more up front, but all of the bits, so oh gosh, it's confusing, but like, so if you want to buy bits, it costs more than the dollar amount, but when you donate that number of bits, I get all of that. Twitch doesn't take any money from it. It's just they take it off the front end when you buy the bits. It's confusing. I was like, I had to do research because I was like, what? This doesn't make sense. Now it makes sense. My accountant doesn't know. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, man. Oh, there we go. There we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that, because I was laughing so hard. I was laughing so hard putting it together. I was like, they're gonna love this. They're gonna love this forever. It's got skitters. It's got Pillarman music. The YouTube video already has a red bar. Yeah, so yeah, for YouTube it pops up as a bar, but I also have a it set up so if someone does do that on YouTube too, the thing will go off. So I hope you guys liked it. I was operating under no expectations that it would ever happen again, but I had it set up because I knew you guys would like it. So there you go. Yes. We're number one. Yeah. Yeah, the Doros, they corrupt everything. We'll get back to it. I'm sorry, got distracted there. I wanted to answer your question because I did find the process like a little odd when I first like learned about it myself. Oh, sorry, I muted the desktop. Hang on, I'll go back 10 seconds. 5 seconds. You get 5 seconds. 5 seconds back.
Halves, turning living resistance into pacified death. The clone formation broke apart around her, and those which did not flee were mercilessly shown the Emperor's peace.
Yeah!
And soon, all that remained of that skirmish was the Sister Legatine and the pile of bodies she stood atop. Looking around, she was somewhat relieved to find the battle lines falling back and away from her position as Imperial forces began to push back the Republican advance. Thanks to the sudden aid provided by their reinforcements and the flanking positions those reinforcements had chosen to take up when entering the battle, the heretical forces of endless clones had not just been stalled, but nearly decapitated. The spear of their forward assault dissolving into disorganized chaos all around her. To their credit, the enemy soldiers did not rout, forming into clumps of stubborn resistance which were gradually being surrounded by advancing Vastillan irregulars, who then took them apart until none remained standing. The Vasties had taken a brutal beating in defense of the approach to the Basilica, and despite their reputation as a more tepid, cautious force of guardsmen, they seemed more than eager to repay their losses back to the unyielding Replicae warriors, showing no quarter and no lack of haste as they took back ground while simultaneously taking their lives. And now, they were not alone, joined by the silent forward march of the Carcosan Untouchables, most of whom had massed to the left and right of the opposing forces. Those few Untouchables which had arrived in the center of the field took up shock rolls, hitting the
Dude! Okay, I just looked, it shows me on my screen that you just got a new badge, Red-Tailed Wolf. Wow. Congrats. Also, it is generally common courtesy to not ask people, like, questions about their finances unless they feel comfortable sharing that with you. So, just be polite and maybe don't ask. Some people take that the wrong way.
Forward-facing enemies hard and without consideration for personal losses. With their additions to the battle, it seemed the surprise assault and assassination-born sabotage of the Republic had finally yielded its last advantages, and Imperial grit and faith was now making the difference. The thoughts were nearly enough to bring a bristling smile to her face, but the sudden trembling within the earth curtailed her joy. Her Auspex picked it up first, but it was not long before she felt it as well. Evidently, the Republic Replicae felt whatever this approaching force was as well, as their groups, clumps, lines, and formations began to dissolve, launching themselves into assaults on the flanking buildings, breaching and escaping into them as they vacated the wide street. And then, she saw them. At first, Reyna had thought she was witnessing the approach of large, low-flying starships, the likes of which she had seen before during their invasion. The repulsive, artificial gravity technology mastered by the aliens allowed them to create utterly impractical designs to fly through the air and hover at will. And she mistook the tanks for such craft, only realizing her error as it became clearer and clearer that these vessels were speeding, not on cushions of air and technology, but on 10 gargantuan spinning wheels.
I don't know what that is.
Forward, forces! Incoming heretic super heavy support is inbound on the main approach! Brace for impact! She yelled through her Vox relay, metal shards crunching and screeching underfoot as she dashed to the smoking wreckage of one of the trundling, walking Republic tanks, taking cover behind it just as these new enormous tanks began to fire. First came volleys upon volleys of missile sprays, most of which were directed.
It's a super heavy support vehicle for the Republic. It's big. It's big. I don't remember all of these like transports. There's so many of them. I'm just like, just trying to keep it all together. Clone War Juggernaut. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Huh. And hello, welcome in. Anyone who's just joining us today. We're just chilling and relaxing, listening to, I guess what I could like most closely describe as an audiobook. Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K, made by a fan with too much time, and it is incredible.
Directed into the battle lines of her fellow sisters. Thanks to her warning, many had taken cover ahead of the sudden assault. But for too many, the warning had not come soon enough, or the cover they had chosen was simply insufficient. But the true devastation began when the many heavy plasma particle turrets which were mounted on these behemoths began to open fire. Additional sprays of death emerged, this time in the form of wide blue blaster bolts which hammered into the Vestellan and Carcosan lines, cutting them down with frightening efficiency. Those few sisters that found themselves in the line of fire for those Azure weapons fared little better. For these weapons were clearly of a wholly different caliber than the handheld blasters the Replica had been using before. Only exacerbating the matters, the huge tanks were speeding at nearly 80 miles an hour. And they did not stop when they collided with the foremost ranks of the Imperium soldiers. Reyna found herself crying out in fear and fury as one of the assault tanks drove straight over where she huddled, crushing and denting the ruined walker under 5 successive metallic wheels, each large enough to smash her flat. She covered her head as the walker corpse above her crinkled and bent, its metal screaming under the strain, but remaining intact enough that she was still whole and not smashed like an insect by the time the speeding, wheeled fortress had passed overhead. Those tanks took back the Republic's ground in brutal fashion, their thick hull plating throwing back very nearly everything the Imperium threw into them, and shrugging off what weapons fire managed to actually stick. When they finally stopped advancing, hatches and ramps deployed from each of the 3 leading vehicles, 300 fresh Replica heretics emerging from each. The troopers immediately re-engaging the stunned Imperial soldiers with alien battle cries and weapons fire. And, to add dismay to Reyna's already growing rage, she felt the rumbling had not stopped, even after they had arrived, and looking back down the avenue, saw 3 more of such tanks rapidly approaching their already haphazard battle lines.
Wait. 16 times longer, twice as wide, and 5 times taller than a Baneblade? That doesn't seem like a tank then. Sounds like something else. That's insane. What the heck?
A chime from her armor declared her jump pack fully charged, and not a moment too soon. Win or lose, death or divinity, Reyna did not doubt her purpose for a second, even if she did doubt the likelihood of her success. These were monsters which threatened to turn back the loyal and the faithful, and to such monsters, she was doom incarnate. Reyna ordained charge down the avenue, the fresh fight at her back, angling herself towards one of the approaching behemoth tanks. Missiles were fired, some even at her, and she again waited until the very last moment before activating her jump jets, sailing high into the sky and arching down towards the command bridge of the tank she had chosen. Using every last iota of her brain power to calculate her impact point, she threw her still-powered sword through the front of the vehicle and curled herself into a ball, throwing herself at full speed towards the viewing window of thick, transparent steel which crowned the command center. The impact jarred her, nearly tearing her left arm from her socket, and numbing her right leg as her body burst into the tank in a shower of glass-like substance and ceramite chips. The sister did not doubt that, had her sword not weakened the wide, transparent viewing port, she would have done little more than collide like an insect against their windshield. Reyna tried to rise, but staggered, servos whining and sputtering after all the abuse. The uniformed command crew of the tank blinked in utter shock at the collapsed figure which had shattered her way into their midst, no one doing much of anything as seconds hung suspended in the air like frozen rain. But that pause ended as one of the commanding clones drew his sidearm and began discharging into the Imperial warrior, his actions prompting the other officers to do the same, drawing blaster pistols and firing into her. The bolts pinged and sizzled into her splintered armor, filling her with the sense of being pelted by heavy, boiling rain, which gradually superheated her shell, even scalding and burning her through the seams. Discarding her reliance on mechanical muscles, she hauled herself up with a strained growl of effort, throwing herself against the nearest clone, grasping and pulling free her weapon which was embedded in the floor near her. Sword impaling the man's chest with barely a strain, his eyes wide, mouth agape, and spewing blood as she pulled the blade out of him through the side of his punctured chest. But she was no longer looking at him, finding her next target and lurching in his direction, screaming in pain as the heat within her suit began to grow near intolerable. The next man she beheaded, kicking the head into the face of another clone as she went for the third kill, cutting the arms off the next assailant, jump jets burning to fill the space with smoke as she tried to provide some sort of concealment for herself. Without helmets or armor of their own, the clone officers were easy prey to her auspex, which guided her through the smoke, and to each of them in turn, even as they continued to shoot after her, following the glow of her blade to try to keep their bead. But their uniforms and sidearms were a bad matchup, even for a crippled sister. She slammed her elbow into the wall beside the hatch that led down into the rest of the vehicle, a blood-strewn mire stretching out behind her. Reyna pushed air from between her teeth, gritting them in a cage of enameled bone as she pushed through the heat, searing pain and bruises she had earned from her latest assault. Though the command deck had seemed vacated, the tank did not stop its movement or attack. Grunting in frustration, she stabbed her blade into the wall, unholstering a bolt pistol from her hip and spinning on her heel, unloading the gun into the nearby consoles, bursting and blowing them all apart. Yet, even this did nothing to slow or stall the Republic war machine. But she also resolved to not be slowed or stalled by this either. She would stop this monster, even if she had to tear out its guts from the inside.
Yeah,
Holstering her gun, she retrieved her sword and slammed her fist against the door control panel. It squealed open in response, revealing the white-helmed face of a trooper who was about to enter. Reyna roared into his face as she pushed her blade through the stunned false man and into the replique behind him, triggering her blade's power field to flare as she slid the sword out, bursting both of them apart. Blue blaster bolts chased and collided with her through the misting gore which coated either wall in the cramped space. There was no room to evade or maneuver in this thing, so she did not bother to try. Charging through the shots, shoulder leading the way as she tackled the troopers attempting to impede her in the narrow hallway. Reyna crushed white armor with the power of squealing, struggling servos, before turning about and lopping down with her blue sword's glowing blade. The sister Legatine discarded grace, embracing brutality as she hacked and chopped through armor and flesh, striking the walls to either side with each attack and leaving long, melting furrows in her wake.
A clone tackled her in return, ramming the barrel of his gun into her shoulder joint as he did, screaming as he fired. Her right shoulder seized up at this and was filled with blinding pain. She used that pain to power a headbutt which shoved the man back, following that up by punching into him with her left arm, her blade slipping from her right hand's fingers and embedding itself in the floor. Her gauntleted strike broke every rib in the man's chest, dropping him to the ground, wheezing and dying. The soldiers behind her opened fire, and she barely shielded her face from the deathly blue volley, raising her left arm to defend herself as she tried to work some kind of feeling into her right arm. Reyna was roasting alive and screamed her pain and fury as she charged forward again, ramming into the closest replique, knocking he and his brothers back and over, though she found herself falling over with them. The close-range blasting devolved into a brutal grappling melee, the clones attempting to use their numbers against her. They tried to pin her down, to put their weight over her as they shoved their guns into the seams of her armor, blaster barrels seeking to press against any part of her skin or face. But the searing pain from those attempts only fueled her fury, her rage becoming the death song of all she faced. Within the main body of the troop-carrying compartment, clones listened to the struggle occurring behind the doors which led into them. Angling blasters, listening to the hymns of death and the cries of fleeting life which almost certainly belonged to their brothers. And then, silence. They waited, braced into overlapping fields of fire, at least as much as the cramped confines would allow them. When the doors slid open, they revealed only inky darkness, the lights in the corridor having been destroyed in the fight. "Sergeant," one of the clones called.
That's not
In
good.
response, two double fist-sized cylindrical objects bounced out of the shadows, landing at the feet of the waiting clones. "Grenade!" The nearest clone began to call, but the explosives had been cooked and provided him no more time than that. They detonated, one expelling smoke and glittering, blinding flares, while the other combusted into a raining fireball of burning, searing phosphor, the purifying substance spreading out like the wings of a merciless phoenix. Its avian cry carried on the sudden frantic screams of the troopers who felt its touch. Blinded by light, smoke, and fire, they were unprepared to carry out their planned defense, as the avatar of the Emperor's intolerance made itself known through the divine instrument that was Reyna Ordain. Minutes later, the Juggernaut would cease its offensive action, having reached its assault position before going silent. It was surrounded by fellow Juggernaut tanks who, even then, not only fired into the enemy positions, but opened their disembarkation ramps, releasing their hordes of hundreds of replicae into the front line of the battle. The troopers of the Republic had expected to see the same emerge from this tank as well, forming up for the continuing forward march. But when the ramp came down, the first thing to emerge was blood, smoke, and the diced, burnt remains of the men who had died too close to the exit. Pools of red flowed down as columns of black were belched out and up. The rolling trundle of a severed, still-helmed head, and the awkward downward flopping roll of a dismembered white limb were joined by the staggered, limping steps of Sister Reyna, who emerged, clutching her sword in her left hand, her hair and armor thickly matted with the blood of just over 300
I was gonna say,
clone
lots
troopers.
of men.
Smoking from every inch, one eye closed against the searing burn, Reyna turned to spitefully regard the clones who gawked at her emergence from the slain tank. Her armor hummed and strained, barely able to keep up with her desired movements now, dragged after her with each plodding attempt she made to approach. All she could do was stand, unbowed, and glare at them, an omen of their futility. She could not even
that'll
raise her
tank
sword
morale.
properly any longer, not even in her good arm. But she showed the surrounding enemy no fear. Instead, when they lifted their blaster barrels towards her, she faced them with a defiant, monstrous glare and roared her battle cry. Though she could not do more than just that. And yet, she needed no more than that. No more at all. It was as if her call had heralded doom itself. For as she let loose her final cry, the steel earth around her seemed to scream back at them, expanding and bursting apart in fiery detonations which scattered the clones present with the force of surprise and deadly power. Several replicae still managed to send shots up at Reyna, which made her grunt as they seared her and impacted onto her chest plate, cracking the already worn down and scorched ceramite as she fell back against the ramp. The sound of battle surrounded her then, and, most notably, the squeal and sigh of mechanical legs, and the deep-throated thrums of vehicle-scaled grenade launchers. A form loomed over her, and it jerked suddenly as she became aware of it, her eyes blinking rapidly to make it out. A man with a scarred face, a young man. He was in a black uniform, and, to her relief, he was clearly an Imperial soldier. Reyna was so relieved, she almost did not release the sudden vice grip she had seized the man with, having wrapped her armored left-hand fingers around his throat without realizing it. She winced and let him go, and he rubbed his neck and grimaced, but reached down to help her up. Luckily, they were not alone. Several other similarly dressed men crowding around her to pull her up into their arms, helping to support her copious weight once they managed to drag her upright. She looked around through hazy eyes as sentinel walkers fought around them, temporarily driving the soldiers back and away while larger munitions fired from weapons she could not see collided with the super heavy Republic tanks. That seemed to keep them occupied as they carried her away to a waiting Chimera transport, and the sister Hospitaller waiting inside.
What regiment?
She groaned the nearest man, the man who had found her first. He smiled devilishly at her, seemingly unconcerned with her nearly breaking his neck earlier. The young man was actually quite handsome, would have been past the 4 raking lines which marked his whole face from one diagonal to the other. Black Carminians, 44th Obsidian Guard, here to do the Emperor's work, he said. And as she was carried away, she saw that he spoke truly, as the sound of crunching tank treads, booming Lehman Russ turrets, and the rumble and roar of something far deeper and far larger entered into her senses. Rest easy, sister. Faith and fury may sustain the fight, but our guns will end it, he said. There was an air-shattering blast then, one which sent the wind whipping and screeching about them, making the Hospitaller flinch back, though the Black Carminians did not even twitch. Sister Reyna Ordain watched from over the soldier's shoulder as the entire head and half the body of a Republic turbo tank seemed to simply vanish, rent apart by the supersonic passage of the solid shells which had sailed through it. The man was still smiling. Our very big guns.
I like that song. It's a good song. Ugh, let's see. How long is the next episode? I'm getting hungry, so I don't know if I could do another 2 hours. Mm. I'm stretching here. I was definitely shrimped up for a lot of that. Gents, we might... Oh, when did my mic turn? My mic, like, did a 90-degree turn. Yeah, gents, the next one is like an hour and 40 minutes long. So it's probably better if we did not. Hang on. Let me switch. But that was good. That was a lot of fun. Oh. Yeah, it's probably... I can't do another one. I'm so hungry. I need to eat. I need to make dinner. But this was a very good time. I had a lot of fun. One second, I'm closing tabs. Closing tabs out. This was a lot of fun though. Did we have fun? A nice relaxing, especially on a Sunday. Going to work tomorrow, like just easing into like a very good end of the weekend. Let's see if we can raid into anyone though, because that could be fun. Let me take a look. What do we got? Let's see. I don't know, my brain is a little cooked. Yeah, no problem, guys. This was a lot of fun. It was nice to relax, and I apologize if I missed some of your bits. Thank you, Shadow Revan and Dino Fan. I know you guys gave a couple bits as well. Thank you guys very much. This was very nice. I want to do more of these because they're just so relaxing and soothing overall. So I hope you guys had a good time as well. So with that, please go follow Fan with Too Much Time. Follow, like... Just his work is great, so please go check him out and give him all the love because he deserves a lot for all this amazing writing that he does. So yes, please go do that. I joined the Discord if you haven't. I will be releasing my schedule this week, but it looks like we'll be we'll be hanging out with Lore Master Sotek again this week. At least that is the plan. So anyways, I will see you all later. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you later this week, guys, alright? Do leg day. Make sure you do the leg day. Okay? Bye!